Chapter 704. Among them, the one who was most shocked was Luo Fu, who had broken through the earthly immortal bottleneck and stepped into the primordial unity immortal realm. Text first. Full text. No advertising. It was precisely because he was stronger than Guang Pu and the others that he naturally had more comprehension towards these glowing figures. This comprehension naturally allowed him to better understand the vastness and grandeur of these changes, causing him to feel even more intense shock. Before this, Luo Fu thought that he had set off a battle of the protagonists in the entire untainted land. He had guided the human clan and the demon clan to fight for the protagonists of the world. He had ignited the flames of war everywhere in the untainted land. It was enough to leave an immortal legend in the endless years of the untainted land in the future. However, compared to the upheaval of the world he saw in his mind, even calling what he had caused a small disturbance would be an exaggeration. The boundless, untainted land was destroyed and reborn in this upheaval. The stars in the sky fell, collapsed, and reunited. The 18 hells squeezed into the untainted land from below. The concentration of primordial chi in the entire untainted land first increased to tens of millions of times, then gradually decreased, and finally stabilized at only 100 times. Even the untainted land was broken into more than 1,000 pieces in the process. The entire area of the untainted land had also obtained an unimaginable increase. The sky was more than 100 times higher, and the ground was more than 100 times thicker. Any one of these was enough to make Luo Fu speechless. At this moment, all the changes were displayed in an instant, and the degree of shock to Luo Fu increased by more than 1,000 times. This made him even unable to control the power in his body. He vaguely wanted to communicate with the supreme great way of the untainted land and seek the infinite mysteries of the great way, in order to naturally achieve the Tai Dao fruit. Fortunately, at this moment, he was in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan was not only a supreme existence at the peak of the Daoyuo disbanded Dao, but also because of various opportunities, he existed independently of the world and was no longer bound by the rules of the untainted land, the Dharma, and even the supreme great way. Under such circumstances, within the fixed range of his body, the supreme great way of the untainted land would naturally form a certain rejection. Therefore, it was many times more difficult for Luo Fu to communicate with the supreme great Dao when he was beside Luo Fan. This gave him sufficient time to regain his senses before he could completely connect with the supreme Grand Dao and receive the boundless profundities of the supreme Grand Dao into his body. Therefore, when the spiritual energy within his body was about to be activated and his earthly immortal fruit was about to be destroyed, Luo Fu finally recovered from his shock. He suppressed the various abnormalities within his body and broke away from the state of connecting to the supreme Grand Dao, communicating with the supreme Grand Dao, receiving the endless mysteries of the Grand Dao into one's body to break through to the next realm. This was the dream of ordinary cultivators, and they were even willing to abandon all other emotions for it. However, to Luo Fu, it was nothing more than this. Compared to this, he was more willing to spend a little more time with his father and was unwilling to waste the time he spent with Luo Fan on this. Luo Fan naturally saw all of Luo Fu's actions, but he did not stop him. Naturally, it was because he respected Luo Fu's choice. More importantly, it was because he had already seen through Luo Fu's cultivation. He knew that, with his current accumulation, no matter how many times he suppressed this kind of communication, it would not affect him at all. He could still communicate with the Supreme Grand Dao at any time and obtain the Tai fruit at any time. The shock that Luo Fu received was far greater than that of Guang Pu and the other two. However, after all, he almost broke through to the next realm. Therefore, when he turned around, Guang Pu and the other two were still in shock. Their expressions were slightly shocked, and their eyes revealed a look of disbelief. However, although the three of them were a little slower than Luo Fu, they were not much slower. After all, those scenes were condensed from the changes in the world caused by Luo Fan's words. Although there was a lot of information, it was far less than when Luo Fan directly poured information into them, and it was even less than seeing it with their own eyes. It was not difficult to break away from the influence. When a few of them woke up, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved. He said, "This is a rare opportunity, don't waste time." His wave did not contain any power, nor did it cause the primordial chi of the untainted land to change. However, this wave produced an unbelievable effect. In an instant, Luo Fu and the rest were like feathers that had been blown by a cool breeze. Their bodies gently floated into the air. Soon after, time and space rapidly flowed. Before they could react, they had already arrived in a world that they were extremely familiar with, yet also seemed so foreign to them. This was the bright world, which had undergone a drastic change in the world. Clearly, Luo Fan's gentle flick had allowed them to traverse the boundless void and arrive at the bright world that was attached to the sun and moon without causing any fluctuations in space-time or energy in the primordial world with that gentle flick. The bright world was a wondrous world that Luo Fan had specially refined for Luo Fu and Guangpu. Their imprints had long been deeply engraved within it. The moment they understood that they were in the bright world, Luo Fu and Guangpu's hearts were touched by Mao Zong's sadness. This touch seemed to be some kind of miraculous primer, causing endless information to wildly surge into their minds from some mysterious place through this primer. This information was none other than the various unbelievable changes that had occurred in the bright world during the upheaval. If it were anyone else, this information would be enough to make any cultivator of the same cultivation level as them explode. However, they were Luo Fu and Guangpu after all. They were the masters of the bright world. As a result, although the amount of information was endless, they were able to completely absorb it with great ease. In fact, in just a few breaths, they completely understood the contents of the information. During this process, they also understood why Luo Fan had asked them to come here at this time. He did not even want to waste the time to have a serious chat with them. After understanding this, Luo Fu and Guang Pu looked at each other. There was joy and relief in their eyes. They did not have much time to reflect on the short time they had spent with Luo Fan. Luo Fu immediately said, "The bright world is about to become a dimensional realm. This is a great opportunity for us. Chunyang, grr, quickly follow me and your mother into the bright world and comprehend its mysteries." Luo Chunyang and Luo Gua had yet to recover from the changes that had occurred before Luo Fu spoke. They were already immersed in the boundless divine might that Luo Fan had displayed earlier. When they heard Luo Fu's words, their eyes involuntarily brightened. They suppressed the various complicated emotions in their hearts and immediately agreed. Since Luo Fan did not waste time, Luo Fu and Guangpu would not waste time either. They were the masters of the bright world. Everything in the bright world was under their control. With just a thought, they moved through the void and arrived at the core of the bright world. It was a seemingly ordinary void. Even the concentration of primordial chi was not much different from other places. However, this place had a wide range of connections. All the rules and laws of the bright world passed through here. As soon as the four of them arrived, Luo Fu and Guang Pu's bodies trembled. The magic power in their bodies spread out at the same time and completely enveloped the four of them. Magic power was the manifestation of the Tao that a cultivator who cultivated the Tao of fruit of Tao had cultivated all his life. The power contained in it was incredibly powerful. Luo Fu and Guang Pu's magic power was still at the level of an earth immortal. Naturally, it was far from Luo Fan's supreme power, which could turn a single magic power unit into a primordial expert. But it also possessed infinite power and could do many things that were miraculous in the eyes of ordinary cultivators. At this moment, the magic power of Luo Fu and Guang Pu had done such miraculous things. After the magic power enveloped the four of them, it naturally produced some indescribable changes. The changes made the four of them disappear without a trace, as if they had directly merged with the bright world and become a part of it. The moment the four of them merged with the bright world with the help of the mysterious power of magic power, the stars in the sky trembled at the same time. The sun and the moon, where the core of the stars were located, produced some strange changes in the vibration. There seemed to be an incredible existence that could not be described with words, as if it contained all the principles, rules, and principles of the primordial universe. It flowed out of nothingness and directly connected the sun and the moon, causing some subtle changes in the relationship between the sun and the moon. Before this change, the sun and the moon were both the core of the stars in the universe. The power between them flowed and complemented each other, vaguely resembling a natural circulation. But the nature of the power between them was, after all, almost completely opposite. Although they complemented each other, there was still a repulsion between them. So, in the process of their power flowing and complementing each other, there was still much mutual annihilation and disappearance. But at this moment, after the subtle change, the faint repulsion between the sun and the moon had been weakened to almost non-existence. With the repulsion weakened, the flow of power between the sun and the moon instantly sped up by 10 times, and the power of each flow also increased by more than 10 times. This change was so obvious that in that instant, the brightness of the sun and moon in the sky abruptly receded. In the blink of an eye, they turned into two disks, one red and one silver, hanging high in the void. They faced each other from afar, and as the light expanded and contracted, it was as if they were breathing in sync. Such a change caused the brightness of the entire primordial world to decrease by several levels. If the primordial world was said to have been exposed to the sun, then at that moment it seemed to be under the gentle morning light. Therefore, although the light had weakened, it could trigger even more powerful vitality, causing the environment of the entire primordial world to become more suitable for the birth of living beings. The reason for this was that the efficiency of the power circulation between the sun and the moon had increased beyond imagination. It was precisely because the efficiency of the power circulation between the sun and the moon had increased that the power that spread out and radiated the entire primordial world weakened again. The manifestation of this power was the light that illuminated the entire primordial world. As a result, the brightness of the primordial world decreased. It went from being overly illuminated to being moderately bright. The change had such an impact on the primordial world. It naturally had an even greater impact on the bright realm that was attached to the sun and the moon. At this moment, the entire Ming realm seemed to be directly linked up by that mysterious existence. In an instant, all the laws and nomological laws of the bright realm were scoured by some unimaginable existence. Every single law and nomological law became more stable, more crystalline, and more profound during this scouring process. To the bright realm, this change was like adding a straw to an already overburdened camel. It directly allowed the bright realm to break through its original bottleneck. It had originally been a medium realm, but it had truly become a medium realm. The difference between a medium realm and a minor kiliocosm seemed to be only one level, but the gap between them was unbelievably huge. This was evident from the fact that a dimensional realm was able to withstand the creation of 3,000 lesser kiliocosms. Besides the fact that a dimensional world could endure thousands of lesser kiliocosms establishing themselves within it, the fact that a dimensional world could give birth to cultivators at the bodiless immortal realm made a dimensional world much stronger than a lesser kiliocosm. In Luo Fan's limitless void palace, the minor kiliocosm, the minor kiliocosm, the minor kiliocosm, and a major kiliocosm formed a three-level system. Among them, the minor kiliocosm could give birth to cultivators who had not reached the immortal Tao. In other words, as long as the living beings who cultivated in the minor kiliocosm achieved immortality, they could no longer cultivate in the minor kiliocosm. They would definitely be pushed away by the minor kiliocosm and enter the upper medium realm. The reason for this was not that the minor kiliocosm could not withstand the living beings who could live forever. It was because as long as the living beings achieved immortality, they would cause some inexplicable harm to the nature of the minor kiliocosm. In the process, the minor chiliocosm would gradually degenerate. In the end, when it reached a certain level, the minor chiliocosm would degenerate into an ordinary space and eventually collapse. It was for this reason that the three-level system in Luo Fan's limitless void palace would have that kind of law appear. After all, although this kind of living beings who cultivated in the minor chiliocosm did little damage to the minor chiliocosm, if a minor chiliocosm wanted to exist for a long time, this kind of damage could not be ignored. Otherwise, one day, the minor chiliocosm would collapse and disappear because of this damage. But the medium realm was different. There was an essential difference between the medium realm and the minor chiliocosm. This difference was that the minor chiliocosm could not be produced continuously. The kind of essence that must be absorbed because of the cultivation of the living beings would be constantly produced and constantly restored. It was because of this characteristic that the medium realm could allow the practitioners of the earthly immortal realm to cultivate in it without the slightest damage. It would not be unbearable because there were too many practitioners of the earthly immortal realm living in it. This was the biggest difference between the medium realm and the minor chiliocosm. It was also the fundamental reason why the medium realm was countless times more precious than the minor chiliocosm. As for the reason why the practitioners of the earthly immortal realm in Luo Fan's limitless void palace were expelled from the medium realm when they broke through the earthly immortal realm and reached the primordial unity realm, so that they could ascend to the boundless world, it was naturally because as long as the practitioners of the primordial unity realm cultivated in the medium realm, it would naturally cause some kind of damage to the medium realm. Eventually, just like the living beings who cultivated in the minor chiliocosm, it would cause the medium realm to degenerate and eventually collapse and disappear. Of course, what the practitioners of the primordial unity realm absorbed while cultivating in a medium realm was naturally not the kind of existence that the living beings absorbed. The practitioners of the primordial unity realm had already seen the primordial unity. What they absorbed was naturally the indescribable primordial unity. This process was a process that no practitioner could control. Even if the practitioner did not even know how the primordial unity was absorbed, where it went after it was absorbed, and what effect it had on him, it could not change the result. As long as he cultivated, the primordial unity contained in the medium realm would naturally flow towards him, and naturally, it would continue to be consumed, and eventually, the medium realm would be damaged. By analogy, what was consumed in the minor chiliocosm was a kind of immortal essence. Perhaps it could be called the earthly immortal. As for the boundless worlds above, there were other mysteries. Perhaps it could produce its own primordial unity. No matter how much it was consumed, it could be restored in the shortest time, so that the primordial unity on the whole of the boundless world would not be reduced. It was precisely because of this that the boundless world could withstand the practitioners of the primordial unity realm cultivating in it. At that time, Luo Fan did not fully understand the reason why his Void Wuji Palace could naturally produce the kind of strange law when the three-level system was at the primary level. He only knew that the emergence of such a law could bring countless benefits to the stability of the three-level system of the world. It could be said that he knew the way, but did not know the reason. However, after witnessing the untainted world survive the great tribulation of heaven and earth, which produced such an incredible upheaval, and after fighting with the four-faced and eight-armed being and touching the realm of the true way of the zenith heaven, he no longer had any doubts about why the three-level system of the world would produce that kind of strange law. The three-level system of the world was naturally produced, and its mysteries were not formed under the control of Luo Fan. Instead, it was a form naturally formed after the appearance of the more than 9 million worlds, which naturally allowed the entire system to exist for the longest time. The law contained in the three-level system of the world, including the law of ascension, was naturally produced by the nearly 10 million worlds in order to survive for a long time. In other words, the emergence of the law of ascension was triggered by the existence of the living beings who cultivated. It was a kind of reflection of the nature of the living beings who cultivated. The absorption of the earth immortal by the longevity living beings when they cultivated, the absorption of the primordial unity realm living beings when they cultivated, and even the absorption of the zenith heaven realm cultivators when they cultivated, were existences that were so obscure that they were completely undetectable to Luo Fan before. But that was only in the past. In the previous battle with the four-faced and eight-armed being, he was touched by the four-faced and eight-armed being. He could even faintly sense the existence that controlled the great tribulation of heaven and earth in the boundless state of chaos above the untainted world. How could the demand of the living beings of the three realms escape his perception? Combined with the form of the three-level system of the world, he naturally only needed to think for a while to understand the nature of it. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 705. Understanding the nature of this, Luo Fan finally understood the nature of the untainted land compared to the vast thousand world. Please be familiar with the domain name. The vast thousand world was a world above the medium thousand world. According to Luo Fan's senses, the earthly immortals in the medium thousand world were renewable resources, which could be replenished at any time. Therefore, it could bear the cultivation of countless earthly immortals. But as long as a cultivator reached the primordial unity realm, the world's resources consumed during cultivation would no longer be earthly immortals, but primordial immortals. According to the analogy of the three-level world system of the infinite void palace, the vast thousand world could bear the cultivation of countless primordial unity realm cultivators, which showed that the primordial unity realm in the vast thousand world was also a renewable resource that could be replenished with consumption, so that the number of primordial unity realm cultivators could be infinite. But, similarly, when a cultivator broke through the primordial unity realm and reached the zenith heaven realm, the result would probably be different. At the zenith heaven realm, what needed to be consumed was obviously no longer the renewable primordial unity, but the zenith heaven. According to the analogy, the zenith heaven realm should not be a renewable resource for the vast thousand world. In other words, if there were zenith heaven realm cultivators cultivating in the vast thousand world, it would cause damage to the vast thousand world, causing it to gradually degenerate into a medium thousand world, then a minor thousand world, and finally, it might even collapse and disappear. Although the degree of this damage might be very small, if the number of zenith heaven realm cultivators was very small, it should not have a big impact. But after all, it was just an influence. If Luo Fan had a way to create a world of a higher level than the boundless world within the limitless void palace, he would definitely not hesitate in the slightest. He would directly use the ascension law to expel the zenith heaven realm cultivators from the boundless void palace and allow them to ascend to a higher level world. However, that was obviously impossible. According to Luo Fan's current understanding, the world higher than the untainted land was at the level of the untainted land, which could resist the boundless corrosion of the chaos in the state of chaos, and could protect the complete world of billions of living beings. Therefore, as long as Luo Fan couldn't attain the Hunyuan Dao fruit, he couldn't possess the supreme divine power that could split the heavens and the earth in the chaotic state of Hun. Therefore, it would be absolutely impossible for him to create a world of a higher level than the boundless world in the Void Wuji Palace. As for the incredible effects of the primordial world that had been formed after the 9 tribulations of heaven and earth, it was not something that Luo Fan could understand at the moment. However, although he couldn't understand it, he could still make a rough guess. According to the rules of the world hierarchy, the colossal world could withstand the cultivation of countless cultivators in the 3 realms of primordial immortal, but could only withstand the cultivation of a very small number of cultivators in the 3 realms of zenith heaven. In that case, the primordial world, which was of a higher level than the major chiliocosm, could naturally bear the cultivation of countless cultivators at the zenith heaven realm. However, it was absolutely impossible for the Hun origin realm that was more profound than the 3 realms of the golden immortal realm to be able to bear boundless burden. If the law of ascension was still effective at the level of perfect heaven and earth, then when the primordial world underwent the 9 tribulations of heaven and earth to become the primordial world, this drawback would be directly eliminated. Because according to this deduction, the world should be able to bear the cultivation of countless cultivators in the Hun origin realm, and it might even be able to bear the existence of a few cultivators who were a level higher than the Hun origin realm. At this moment, Luo Fan looked at the boundless starry sky above him and sensed the changes that were happening in the bright realm behind the sun and moon. His heart was suddenly moved, and the principles that he had comprehended before but had not had the time to organize suddenly flashed in his mind. It seems that this speculation should not be wrong. According to the old legend, there can only be 9 saints in the primordial world at most. Other than these 9 saints, if other living beings have the chance to become saints, many saints will join forces and set up various arrangements to kill them. If the legend is true, then this speculation must be true. Luo Fan's mind was extremely clear. In the blink of an eye, he removed the layers of fog in front of him and saw the truth of the old legend. In the past, when Luo Fan thought of the various legends of the primordial world, he would find it extremely strange. Why did the few saints no longer cultivate as they did in the past after becoming saints? Instead, they deliberately set off rounds of killing tribulations. In the killing tribulations, they continuously wiped out some cultivators with outstanding aptitudes, causing the primordial world to continuously fall into reincarnation. One had to know that saints were powerful existences that were immortal and indestructible. Even if the primordial world was destroyed, they could still survive in the chaos. At most, it would be more troublesome to create a new world and reenact the primordial world. From this, it was obvious that all living beings that had not become saints, no matter how long their lifespans were only for an extremely short period of time to them, who could not even be harmed by the destruction of the world. They would disappear in a flash like a morning star. Because of that, they naturally thought that all living beings other than those at the level of sages were just insignificant ants. Just like an ordinary person with a lifespan of 100 years, he would never regard a floating monster with a lifespan of less than a day as his own kind, nor would he have strong feelings for it. In this way, it was obvious that in the eyes of saint-level existences in this world, only those who were also saint-level existences were their own kind. They were the only existences that could make them have feelings for each other. In other words, every sage was lonely and lonely. They might not get tired of looking at the same faces for millions or tens of millions of years, but how could they not get tired of looking at the same faces for billions of years, tens of trillions of years, or even millions of reincarnations after the destruction of the world and rebirth? Under such circumstances, any saint would obviously welcome an unfamiliar living being to become saint. It was equivalent to adding a new member to a race that only had a few members. How could they not welcome it? However, that was not the case. The truth was that the saints had schemed to wipe out all the people in the primordial world who had the opportunity to become a saint, so that the number of saints in the primordial world could be maintained at a few. They were merciless and did not exceed the limit. In the legends of the old people, the saints were narrow-minded. They were unwilling to let ants share their position as saints, and they were unwilling to let others share their supreme authority. Luo Fan might have believed this before he cultivated, but now that he had also cultivated to a supreme cultivation realm in the primordial world, he realized that this guess was so unreliable. Because at this moment, he was incomparably looking forward to a cultivator who could reach his current realm, who could achieve the same level of cultivation as him, and who could benefit from his cultivation. He didn't need to comprehend all of his gains by himself, and all of his achievements could only be displayed in front of cultivators who were tens of thousands of times weaker than him. Some of his flaws could only be made up for after a long period of time, or he could discover them by chance. Even he was like that. The mentality of the saints would only be more serious than his. How could they be narrow-minded? How could they be worried that someone would share their supreme authority? Under such analysis, it was obvious that only the speculation about the endurance of the world was correct. Once this idea was confirmed, which of the legends of the Great Desolation that he had heard in the past were true, and which were just conjectures, what was the root cause of the occurrence of the facts, and what were the thoughts of those sages that did all of this? All of this was no longer a secret to Luo Fan. The Dragon Han tribulation, the great Magi-Demon War, the great God-Confirmant War, are nothing more than the efforts of the saint-level existences to set off the great tribulation of heaven and earth again and again. Other than killing all living beings who have the chance to become saints, the greater reason is probably to let the primordial world advance through these tribulations. In the end, it will become a world that can bear the burden of countless saints. Unfortunately, according to the legends I heard, the efforts of those saints have probably failed. Not only are they unable to advance the primordial world into a world during these tribulations, but they are also causing the primordial world to shatter again and again. In the end, it will become weaker and smaller. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind, and there was a look of pity and regret in his eyes. According to this theory, the Earth universe might have been caused by the saints' desire to set off the great tribulation of heaven and earth, causing the advancement of the world to fail. That's why the world naturally formed the flow of the times. Luo Fan's thoughts wandered, and in the blink of an eye, he thought of the Earth universe that was an unknown distance away. He could not help but guess. There was no basis for this guess, but Luo Fan was quite confident in it. After all, the flow of the times in the Earth universe that reincarnated once every 5-6 billion years was simply too strange. That was not in line with the original pursuit of a perfect world. The world did not have spiritual consciousness in the ordinary sense, but as a perfect world that could exist forever in the chaotic state of Hun and protect endless living beings. A perfect world naturally could not be a muddle-headed dead thing. It must have spiritual consciousness from a certain macroscopic point of view. Since it had spiritual consciousness, the perfect world would naturally have an instinctive need for continuous advancement. Advancement would trigger the great tribulation of heaven and earth. In order to trigger the great tribulation of heaven and earth, there must be living beings in the world that were strong enough to bear the brunt of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, a perfect world could not change the era every once in a while, completely erase all traces of the old era, and kill all the powerful living beings in the world. However, that was exactly what the Earth universe did. From the looks of it, other than the fact that the Earth universe had been tormented too many times and had long lost hope of advancing, it only wanted to maintain its current form of existence, and did not want the existence of powerful living beings in the world that could threaten its existence. What other explanation could there be? Perhaps the 7 saints did not cultivate to become saints in the era of the saints, but in the extremely ancient times, when the Earth universe had not lost hope, and there were no powerful beings who had cultivated to become saints before the reincarnation of the times every 5-6 billion years. Perhaps the eruption at the end of the age of chaos this time was already an eruption after countless of their efforts were erased by the great tribulation of heaven and earth with the help of the times. Otherwise, why would the heavens deserve to die? Luo Fan's mind raced. All sorts of mysteries that he could not see clearly in the past and could not understand unfolded in his heart like silk peeling off a cocoon. In a daze, his vision had already surpassed the primordial world. Although he had already existed independently of the primordial world, his vision had been limited to the primordial world due to his insufficient cultivation realm. He could not transcend it, but his vision had been raised beyond imagination. It had been raised to a realm that could barely be on par with his current state. When his vision reached this realm, Luo Fan suddenly felt that everything in the primordial world was so simple. All the things that he had found complicated and difficult to solve in the past seemed to have instantly become extremely simple. Even his cultivation realm had taken a huge step forward because of the change in his vision. In the blink of an eye, he had already broken through the peak of the zenith heaven dispelling Tao. From the time he had only touched the zenith heaven dispelling Tao, he had truly stepped into the zenith heaven dispelling Tao realm. As he improved, his body became blurry in the primordial world. An indescribable repulsive force suddenly appeared in the primordial world and pressed down on him. It was as if it wanted to directly push him out of the primordial world, causing him to no longer exist under the shroud of the rules, laws, and even the supreme great Tao of the primordial world. The moment Luo Fan felt the pressure, he understood what was going on. He smiled and raised his head to look at the invisible sky. His gaze was deep and distant, as if he could see through the endless obstacles and see an incredible existence hidden behind the sky. Although I came out of the primordial world independently, I have yet to obtain Hun essence. When I cultivate, I do not need to absorb Hun essence. Why are you in such a hurry to get rid of me? He muttered, as if he was talking to himself, but also as if he was talking to some incredible existence in the dark. At this moment, he was speaking to the supreme great Tao in the primordial world. However, it was obvious that his words could not be understood by the supreme great Tao, nor could it cause a reaction from the supreme great Tao. After all, although the primordial world had spiritual consciousness on a certain macro level, that kind of spiritual consciousness could only be understood and circulated by spiritual consciousness that had also reached the macro level. At this moment, even though Luo Fan had broken through the peak of the zenith heaven dispersing Tao and was an invincible existence in the primordial world, his spiritual consciousness was still the same as before. How could it reach the macro level? Since he had not reached the macro level, it was naturally impossible for him to really talk to the primordial world. Therefore, after he finished speaking, the primordial world was still continuously repulsing him. Although the repulsive force did not increase, it did not weaken either. As for why the primordial world would reject Luo Fan, it was because Luo Fan had achieved a breakthrough in his cultivation realm and stepped into the zenith heaven true Tao. At this moment, the zenith heaven true Tao, absorbed by the zenith heaven realm cultivator when he was cultivating in the primordial world, was stirred violently. Millions of times more zenith heaven true Tao was instantly consumed by him. Even for living beings that did not exist independently of the primordial world and were closely related to the primordial world, this kind of consumption was enough to cause a violent reaction from the primordial world. Endless heavenly tribulations descended to punish and test living beings. Moreover, Luo Fan had already completely cut off his connection with the primordial world, allowing himself to exist independently of the primordial world. He was no longer affected by any changes in the primordial world. Compared to other living beings, he was much further away from the primordial world. Under such circumstances, he would naturally cause a violent reaction from the primordial world when he consumed so many zenith heaven true Tao. It was only natural that the primordial world would produce such an unimaginable repulsive force towards him. On the contrary, the primordial world would welcome Luo Fan to consume the zenith heaven true Tao and show all sorts of phenomena of heavenly bodies falling from the sky for his breakthrough. That would be unbelievable. If this vast and almost unstoppable repulsive force happened normally, Luo Fan would probably be able to enter the limitless void palace and consume the zenith heaven true Tao that was difficult to replenish in the major kiliacosm. He would cause the major kiliacosm to suffer great damage in order to support his final breakthrough. However, at this moment, he did not need to do that. What time was it now? Why did he finally cross the barrier and obtain a huge breakthrough in his cultivation realm? At this moment, the great tribulation of the world had just passed, and there were still remnants. As for him, it was because the stars in the sky were undergoing a miraculous change. At the moment when they became even more mysterious and unbelievable, he obtained a breakthrough in his vision, which brought about a breakthrough in his cultivation realm. From this, it could be seen that at this moment, the miraculous existence that controlled the great tribulation of the world and was the root of the existence of the great tribulation of the world was still connected to the primordial world and was still around Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, why should he hide from the repulsive force produced by the primordial world? Although the repulsive force of the primordial world was vast and boundless, it was only targeted at Luo Fan. It was not the full power of the entire world. To Luo Fan, such a force was naturally almost unstoppable. However, to the miraculous existence that could even play with the primordial world in the palm of its hand and could casually trigger the great tribulation of the world that could destroy the primordial world. What was it? Luo Fan didn't need to move. With just a slight thought, the miraculous existence that could nourish his body slowly flowed through his mind. That incomparably miraculous existence gave birth to an extremely subtle and inconceivable change. Even Luo Fan couldn't understand the slightest bit of change. Under this change, a thumb-sized stone suddenly rolled down the mountain in a certain location in the primordial world. On the way down, the stone hit a huge rock. The huge rock was connected to a mind vein underground through an extremely complicated communication connection. The angle and strength of the thumb-sized stone that hit the huge rock coincided with some incredible principle. When it was transmitted to the mind vein, it instantly caused the mind vein to tremble violently. The violent trembling of the mind vein caused the earth to tremble. The trembling of the earth caused the void to tremble. The trembling of the void caused a strange fluctuation of a certain rule. Just like that, after countless unbelievable coincidences and unimaginable changes, the powerful repulsive force on Luo Fan disappeared silently. It was as if it had never appeared before and disappeared naturally. Hashtag Chapter 706. Although these incredible changes were caused by Luo Fan still felt an indescribable shock when he sensed that the boundless repulsive force that was placed on him from the entire world had completely disappeared as if it had never appeared. Text first, full text. No advertising the power of that mysterious existence was simply too incredible. At this moment, what he could trigger was only a trivial part of it, but it could already produce such an incredible effect. How could he not be shocked? At this moment, he no longer had any doubts about using that mysterious existence to prove the primordial Tao fruit. With just a slight activation of its power, it could cause such a huge impact on the primordial world. It directly suppressed the supreme great Tao of the primordial world, causing the supreme great Tao to undergo changes that were originally impossible to appear. If he could completely activate that mysterious existence, it would not be difficult to push a cultivator to the saint level. Unfortunately, although he no longer had any doubts about this, he knew that it was almost impossible to truly use it to prove the primordial Tao fruit. After all, he was only in existence at the peak of the zenith heaven scattered Tao. Even if he had a breakthrough in his cultivation realm and barely reached the zenith heaven true Tao, it was only the zenith heaven true Tao. Not to mention the saint level, he was still hundreds of millions of miles away from the zenith heaven golden Tao, which had the chance to become a saint. Under such circumstances, it was already inconceivable for him to be able to draw out the slightest bit of that mysterious existence's power with his extraordinary means. How could he possibly draw out more power? How could he rely on this power to directly advance to the primordial chaos realm? Although it was a pity, Luo Fan was not discouraged. Although the mysterious existence was about to retreat, and unless the great tribulation of heaven and earth descended, it would be difficult for it to descend into the primordial world again. However, he would not have the thought of forcefully keeping this mysterious existence here. After all, Luo Fan knew his own limits. If he was already at the saint realm, there was still a sliver of a possibility for him to forcefully keep this mysterious existence here. However, at this moment, even if he had such a thought, it would most likely cause a strong backlash from that existence. At that time, not to mention benefits, what awaited him would probably be death and his soul dispersing. Under such circumstances, how could he have such thoughts that far exceeded his own strength? With a single thought, he sensed an incomparably mysterious grand Luo seeping into his body, causing his body and mind to undergo indescribable transformations. His zenith heaven Tao fruit underwent an unimaginable transformation during this process. In the blink of an eye, it had completely transformed into an extremely pure fruit. The shape of the fruit was extremely strange and mysterious. It seemed to be constantly changing, but it also seemed like its shape was fixed at all times. However, anyone who saw it would think that it was a fruit. It was an incomparably profound and perfect fruit that contained all the principles and profundities of a universe. In the end, it could grow into another supreme Tao. Within the fruit, the magical power units that were constantly surging out also underwent an extremely mysterious change in an instant. The perfect aura contained within it skyrocketed, and its form underwent a transformation similar to the Tao fruit. It also seemed to be ever-changing, causing others to be unable to describe exactly what form it took. However, anyone could tell with a single glance that it was the most minute component unit of magic power. It was a type of magic power unit that could directly communicate with the Tao and unleash unbelievable power. It was almost omnipotent. These two changes caused Luo Fan's body to undergo a shocking transformation as well. Every single part of his body, even the smallest part, was instantly cleansed by boundless and unbelievable power. It was practically improved by hundreds and thousands of times. In the blink of an eye, his body was already more than 10,000 times stronger than before he broke through. Although the three realms of the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit all belonged to the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, they were essentially the same. However, the gap between the two realms was so huge that it reached an unimaginable level. After all, this realm was a realm from an ordinary living being to an undying and invincible saint. On the other hand, even if an ordinary living being was at the peak of the golden path, the difference between them and a saint was so great that even the heavens and the earth could not describe it. Under such circumstances, the difference between the three realms of the golden path could practically reach boundless heights according to the different cultivation methods. The greater the difference, the more profound one's cultivation would be when one attained the peak of the golden path in the end, and the difficulty of breaking through to become a saint would naturally decrease. The Tao fruit Grand Tao that Luo Fan cultivated was obviously an extremely profound technique that could practically be considered to be a supreme cultivation technique in the boundless state of chaos. Thus, the gap between the three realms of the golden immortal realm was naturally unimaginably enormous in the Tao fruit Grand Tao. That was why it was like this. Although it was only a small breakthrough, it had already caused Luo Fan to undergo such a huge transformation. Even the profundities of his body had been improved by more than 10,000 times. However, this transformation did not stop because of this. After this transformation, Luo Fan's sea of consciousness could not help but undergo an inexplicable change. It was as if the world was being created and the world was evolving. The sea of consciousness expanded at an unimaginable speed, and the density of vitality in it increased rapidly. In just a short while, the sea of consciousness had expanded by 10 times compared to before, and the density of vitality in it had also increased by 10 times. Although this kind of increase seemed to be far inferior to the strength of the body, one should not forget that this was a transformation of a world. If the growth of the sea of consciousness was converted into an increase in personal strength, even for Luo Fan, it would be equivalent to him becoming hundreds of thousands of times stronger. No matter how difficult it was to understand, just look at the growth that the primordial world had obtained after passing through the great tribulation of heaven and earth. It was only 10 times wider and 100 times thicker, and one could see how shocking the change in the sea of consciousness was. When the sea of consciousness changed, in the center of the sea of consciousness, the giant formed by Luo Fan's soul also underwent an inexplicable change. When Luo Fan attained the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit and achieved the Zenith Heaven Dispelling Tao, Luo Fan's soul had undergone an inexplicable change. Other than becoming larger and more realistic, the aura he gave off became even more vast. The desolate and unyielding aura also added an indescribable perfection, as if his soul had reached a peak that could no longer grow and could no longer be perfected. However, at this moment, his soul had advanced once again at this peak that could no longer grow and could no longer be perfected. A wondrous ripple spread out from the soul and instantly spread through the entire sea of consciousness. The entire sea of consciousness began to churn along with the ripple. The endless yuan qi in the sea of consciousness, the infinite laws, and the countless laws all underwent a wondrous change due to the ripple. This change caused the fusion between the entire sea of consciousness and the soul to skyrocket by countless times. In the blink of an eye, they had gone from being independent to fusing into one. It was as if the world had gradually become Luo Fan's soul, and his soul had gradually become the world. At this moment, the three-eyed giant that was originally standing in Luo Fan's sea of consciousness, the projection that the world had condensed to welcome him, was instantly crushed by an indescribable pressure and turned into a strange ball of light. The strength of the saint of the Julie world could be seen from the four-faced, eight-armed existence from before. If this three-eyed giant was the body of the saint, even if it was only a projection or a clone, even if Luo Fan was tens of thousands of times stronger, he would not be able to withstand the pressure of a single finger. However, at this moment, it was not a projection, nor was it a clone. It was only a projection that the primordial world had condensed to welcome the arrival of the saint. Although this projection contained unimaginable power, it was fundamentally different from the projection of the saint himself. There was no consciousness of the saint in it. Since there was no existence of the saint, this projection was just a dead object. Perhaps one could obtain some of the mysteries of the saint's cultivation through the body, but it was wishful thinking to truly rely on it to become a saint. Even if one wanted to rely on it to break through the three realms of the zenith heaven, it was almost impossible. This was very different from what Luo Fan had expected in the past. This was also the reason why Luo Fan had never thought of using this body to comprehend the mysteries after attaining the zenith heaven Dao fruit. Previously, when he was still in the three realms of primordial unity, Luo Fan had obtained countless benefits from this body. With the help of this body's third eye, he had comprehended countless mysteries of the primordial world. Therefore, at that time, he had thought that when he broke through the three realms of primordial unity and reached the three realms of the zenith heaven, he might be able to fully activate this body and allow it to exert unimaginable power. Then, with the help of this power, he would comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao, and finally achieve a breakthrough and achieve supreme power. However, when he attained the golden immortal Tao fruit, the deprivation energy created by the supreme grand Tao had completely deprived him of all the profundities he'd comprehended, and this even included the profundities he'd comprehended by relying on the body of the three-eyed giant. After that, he used the scene of the moment when the crazy swordsman created the world to comprehend the various experiences he had lost due to the power of deprivation. He completely filled up his foundation and created an almost perfect foundation. He comprehended all the mysteries under his cultivation realm and exerted all the power contained in his cultivation realm to an extremely perfect state. Under such circumstances, the third eye of the three-eyed giant was no longer of any use to him. He had already comprehended what he could comprehend, and what he couldn't comprehend, even if he saw it with the help of the third eye, he wouldn't be able to comprehend it. And if he wanted to break through to the next realm, he needed some kind of improvement in his understanding, and it needed some kind of indescribable understanding. This was something that couldn't be achieved with the help of this body that didn't have the will of a saint. That was why the three-eyed giant's body wasn't of much use to him after he attained the golden immortal Tao fruit. At most, it was able to allow him to understand exactly what sort of existences were at the saint realm and observe the outside world from a certain perspective. In his opinion, it wasn't much different from being useless. At this moment, Luo Fan's soul had obtained a tremendous improvement, and it had truly fused with the sea of consciousness. At this moment, the sea of consciousness was the soul, and the soul was not just the sea of consciousness. Under such circumstances, the sea of consciousness already possessed the wonderful characteristics of the soul, the characteristics of the great perfection that he attained after attaining the zenith heaven Tao fruit. Since it was at great perfection, it was naturally extremely pure, and it was difficult for any impurities to remain. Although the three-eyed giant existed in the form of a saint's body, It was only an impurity to Luo Fan's soul. As a result, it was difficult for it to remain in the sea of consciousness that possessed the characteristics of the soul. That was why he could rely on this indescribable great perfection characteristic to destroy the unimaginably sturdy giant's body that could not even be moved by the heavens and earth, turning the body into a strange ball of light, returning to the essence of the world's energy and principles that were naturally condensed by the world. That Yuan Qi was extremely pure and mysterious. It was a miraculous Yuan Qi that was several times more advanced than the chaos Yuan Qi. The principles were the fundamental principles of the unbelievable power contained in the saint's body. It was endless and profound information. If someone could comprehend the profound information, they would naturally be able to comprehend the method to cultivate the saint's body. Of course, it was only a method. It was just like knowing the details of a building. If one wanted to truly build the building, they had to build it brick by brick. It was impossible to obtain the building in one go. Even if one had the bricks and tiles to build the building at the same time, it would only make the process smoother. It would not directly skip the process. In comparison, the mysterious energy was the bricks and tiles, and the information was the details of the building. As for where the energy and the information came from, it was even simpler. The saint level was simply too powerful and terrifying. Just the aura that was about to descend was enough to cause the primordial world to resonate, causing the information contained in the supreme great Tao of the primordial world to naturally condense into one. Along with the vitality that condensed along with the resonance, it appeared and constructed that body. In other words, this information was something that the saint-level existence had unintentionally snatched from the supreme great Tao of the primordial world. Or rather, it could be said that it had relied on its inconceivable existence. The information and vitality were very likely to be vastly different from the structure and physical body of the saint of the Jili Great World. However, the essence of the two was definitely extremely similar. After all, it was condensed from the resonance of the aura of the saint's will. If its essence did not match the saint's will, it would not condense. At that moment, Luo Fan understood this the moment the three-eyed giant's body collapsed into a ball of light. After understanding this, he finally understood how laughable his previous speculation that the image of the body was the image of the saint's body was. The image of the body was only a projection of the saint's essence in the primordial world. It could be said that it was the primordial world's understanding of the saint's essence. It was the image that the saint would appear if he was born in the primordial world. In the Jili Great World where the saint resided, its rules, laws, and even great Tao were different from the primordial world. As a result, the understanding of the saint's essence would naturally be very different from the primordial world. As a result, the image of the saint in the Jili Great World could not be the same as the image in the primordial world. Clearly, it could not be the image of the three-eyed giant. With a small difference in cultivation, my knowledge, insight, and understanding will indeed be vastly different. It's still too early for me to consider the various things after the primordial chaos Tao fruit. At that moment, Luo Fan could not help but sigh with emotion. After understanding the mistakes in his previous speculations, Luo Fan no longer had much confidence in his speculations. He even understood that there was a huge difference between his speculations and the true existence of the saint. However, this was already the limit of his knowledge. No matter how he thought about it or tried to understand it, he could not find out what had gone wrong, much less change it. I'm afraid that my speculations about the actions of the saint in the Earth universe are also wrong. In the future, I must leave some leeway. Otherwise, if I treat my previous speculations as the truth, I'll definitely suffer. A thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Although he thought this way, he did not feel that the improvement in his insight was an illusion, nor did he lose confidence because of it. Instead, his mind became clearer, and he even felt that his insight had improved once again. His understanding of the saint level was deeper than before, and he had a clearer understanding of his future path of cultivation. This was not difficult to understand. The premise of realizing that one's understanding of something was wrong was naturally to deepen one's understanding of something. Otherwise, how could one realize that one's understanding of food was wrong? Luo Fan's soul stood at the center of the sea of consciousness and slowly lowered his hands. Originally, his soul had acted as Pangu's role in the primordial world in the sea of consciousness, supporting the world and preventing it from merging. If it was the original situation, if he put down his hands and stopped supporting the world, the sky would probably press down and the earth would float up. In the end, the world would merge and turn into chaos, wiping out everything that existed in it. However, at this moment, after Luo Fan put down his hands, the entire world only trembled slightly, and there was no more reaction. It was as if the world had completely stabilized, as if the primordial world no longer needed the support of Buzhou Mountain, and he no longer needed to support it. Hashtag free download of a full-text ebook. Chapter 707. At this moment, the world and the sea of consciousness had become one with Luo Fan's spirit to a certain extent. The world and the sea of consciousness was Luo Fan's spirit, and Luo Fan's spirit was not just the sea of consciousness. First text. Free download of a full-text ebook. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan only needed to think about it, and he would naturally be able to exist as the world in the sea of consciousness. As a result, the pressure in the sea of consciousness could naturally be transferred to his body through some unimaginable and mysterious method with just a thought. He no longer needed to hold up the sky with his hands and feet on the ground to support the world like before. As a result, this scene happened. After withdrawing his hands, the expression on Luo Fan's spirit's face was the same as before. There were not many changes. Clearly, the pressure he felt was not much different from before. At this moment, Luo Fan's spirit trembled slightly, and his body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a short while, he shrank from his towering height to the size of a normal person. It seemed to be another Luo Fan. In fact, compared to the real Luo Fan's body seemed to possess even more of Luo Fan's essence. In other words, when this godly spirit and Luo Fan's body were placed together, it might even make people feel that this godly spirit was the real Luo Fan, while his body was a kind of replica-like existence. Although the pressure of the world on his body did not change, Luo Fan's spirit had already been emptied of its hands, and his body had barely achieved relative freedom. However, he could do many more things than before. He took a step forward and arrived before the ball of light that the saint's body had transformed into. The ball of light was so huge that it almost enveloped the sky, as if there was another sun in the sky. If Luo Fan's spirit was towering like before, it would naturally be comparable to this ball of light. However, at this moment, he was the size of a normal person. Compared to this ball of light, he seemed so tiny, like an ant. However, this was only the surface. In essence, Luo Fan's spirit was still the same as before. It was still comparable to the light. With a wave of his hand, a mysterious existence within the ball of light began to surge violently. The intensity of the surging increased from weak to strong, from small to large. At first, it only caused the light to tremble slightly, but later on, it caused the light to surge endlessly, as if it was a primordial divine dragon wrapped in a thin film and struggling frantically. It made people worry at all times whether this light would suddenly explode and produce an inconceivable power that would destroy the world. The mysterious existence in the light was none other than the will that Luo Fan had placed into the body of the saint a long time ago. When he first entered the saint's body, he could not even move the saint's body. At most, he could only make the saint's body open its third eye and see the weak existence in the outside world for a moment. But at this moment, Luo Fan was already billions of times stronger than before. Naturally, these wills would also receive an incredible increase due to his strength. The increase was so great that it had reached an indescribable level. It was just like how every magic power unit could turn into a powerful creature that was tens of thousands of times stronger than Luo Fan's original body. Every bit of will in those wills could trigger a power that was tens of thousands of times stronger than all of Luo Fan's spirit power. Under these circumstances, the thoughts that Luo Fan had imbued into the saint's body were able to cause the essence of the saint's body to surge so violently that it was about to be blasted apart by these thoughts. This was also one of the reasons why Luo Fan no longer needed the saint's body. At this moment, he could even destroy the saint's body with just a few wills. Why would he need the saint's body to provide him with any benefits? The surging lasted for a long time. When the surging reached the highest level, countless tiny cracks that looked like spider webs instantly flashed on the surface of the light. There were no advertisements. When these spider webs first appeared, they seemed extremely weak and insignificant. It was as if they were lines drawn with the world's smallest pen. However, these spiderweb-like cracks were expanding at an unimaginable speed. In the blink of an eye, they completely wrapped around the surface of the light, directly expelling it. The existences behind the cracks were directly revealed, and they were no longer blocked by the light. The existences that were revealed were all crystal clear. They seemed to be the most beautiful, sturdiest, and most incredible gems in the world. These gems were none other than the condensed will that Luo Fan had placed into the saint's body. Every gem was the product of condensing one's will to the limit and materializing nothingness into reality. They were mysterious existences that were similar to magic power units. The light that flickered on them was the purest light of wisdom. They were all lights that had been refined countless times and had reached an incredible level of wisdom. Behind the cracks that appeared, there were a total of 1,296 of these gems. Each of them was the size of a head, and they were arranged in a row. The light they emitted connected together and formed a mysterious formation. It gave off a domain-like aura that enveloped the entire ball of light. The shattered light was affected by this formation and was directly absorbed into the natural formation formed by the 1,296 gems. It was divided into countless tiny clumps, like countless starlights in the starry sky, arranged within the formation. Luo Fan's spirit slightly opened its hands, as if it was embracing the entire formation. When all these changes were over, he casually pointed with a finger, and more than 10,000 sparkling and translucent gems rushed out from his divine soul and directly merged into the huge formation, causing it to suddenly become 10 times larger than before. They formed a huge formation made up of 12,960 gems. The power was more than 10,000 times stronger than before. Under this supreme power, the formation suddenly weakened, and the domain-like aura that was produced before instantly skyrocketed. After it skyrocketed to a limit, there was a shocking change in its nature. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a mysterious starry sky that directly replaced the original formation. This starry sky was the real thing. There was no illusion at all. The stars on it were the endless specks of light. The power of each speck of light was naturally far inferior to that of a real star, but the power contained in the light itself was unimaginably mysterious. The total amount of energy they emitted could not compare to that of a real star, but its nature was many times more exquisite than the essence of the stars. Therefore, everything that was enveloped by was no different from being enveloped by a real star. Instead, it was even more mysterious, and one could obtain more benefits. The gems that rushed out from Luo Fan's spirit were naturally the same. They were condensed from his will, and they also flickered with the light of unimaginable wisdom. Luo Fan's divine soul stood in front of this starry sky. His hands slowly drew a mysterious trajectory that contained the infinite truths of the great Tao and the wonderful rhythm of the world. Under these trajectories, the huge and incomparably real starry sky seemed to be slowly pushed, and it began to slowly revolve. The way it revolved also contained some kind of profound truth. That truth was not the heavenly cycle star formations. If Luo Fan planned to use this starry sky as the starry sky of his sea of consciousness, he would naturally have to push the starlight with the heavenly cycle star formation's profound truth, so that the starlight would form a system of its own, and the power would flow and complement each other. In the end, it would continuously grow until it became a true immemorial star that would illuminate the sea of consciousness for eternity. However, it was clear that although these lights looked like stars, they were not stars in essence, and could not even touch the essence of the stars. Even if they were of a higher level than the essence of the stars, since they were not stars, it was naturally impossible to push them with the method of pushing stars. That would inevitably lead to unpredictable consequences. As for Luo Fan, he obviously did not need to use the stars to illuminate the sea of consciousness to obtain any power. It was precisely because of this that it was not necessary to turn it into a starry sky, and it might instead lead to unpredictable consequences that Luo Fan did not choose to turn it into a true starry sky. At this moment, the way he pushed these lights to revolve was not something else, but it coincided with the structure of the saint's body that was originally contained in the ball of light. The structure of the saint's body was originally completely fused with the ball of light that the saint's body had turned into. They were one, an inseparable whole. However, when Luo Fan operated the wheel and the light, he had already separated the information from the light through various exquisite and unpredictable means, and directly turned the information into his own. This information was extremely complicated, and its intricacies and profundities had reached an unimaginable level. It almost contained the essence of the saint's body. But for Luo Fan, it was not a mystery that was difficult to understand. After all, at this time, Luo Fan had already completely comprehended all the mysteries that matched his own cultivation realm after he used the scene of the sword madman splitting the heavens and earth to make up for his deprived foundation. With this foundation, he was definitely the most knowledgeable and the most powerful being in the same realm. The mysteries of the construction of the saint's body naturally had many mysteries that surpassed his cultivation realm, but most of them were still within the scope of his understanding. He naturally could not completely understand the mysteries that surpassed his level of attainment, but through the greater amount of information mysteries that he could already understand, he could completely derive the method to understand these mysteries through a single line of deduction. Of course, this was on the premise that he could first obtain a corresponding level of attainment to understand these mysteries. In other words, through the various mysteries of the information that Luo Fan already knew, he already had a path to those mysteries that he did not understand without any hindrance. In other words, he had a path to heaven that led directly to the saint's body. But before that, there was a prerequisite. He must have a cultivation realm that was compatible with each stage of the saint's body in order to truly construct the saint's body at that stage. This was naturally of little value to Luo Fan. After all, as long as Luo Fan had the scene of the sword madman splitting the heavens and earth, as long as his cultivation realm reached a certain stage, he could spend a certain amount of time to reach the peak of that stage and completely comprehend all the corresponding mysteries of that stage. This naturally included the mysteries of the saint's body at that stage. As a result, as long as his cultivation reached a certain realm, he only needed to think for a moment, and he would naturally be able to understand these mysteries. He would then be able to directly form a saint's body at that stage, and he would not need to use this method that led directly to the saint's body to construct it. Similarly, if his cultivation realm was insufficient, even if he spent all his time on this method, even if he spent all his time until the end of the primordial era and the end of time, he would absolutely not be able to comprehend the mysteries within. Therefore, it could be said that for Luo Fan, this method was only tasteless and a pity to discard. However, this was only for Luo Fan. For other creatures and cultivators, this method was an incomparably precious existence. If they obtained this method, as long as they cultivated to a certain stage, they would naturally be able to use the various mysteries contained within this method to change their bodies. This would allow their bodies to become closer to the most powerful body in that stage, and in the end, they would easily possess the peak strength of that stage and the most powerful might. In fact, due to the incredible power of the saint's body, they could even use this method to comprehend other related mysteries. From there, they would gain more comprehension of their own cultivation realm and deepen their understanding of the great Tao. As a result, the difficulty of breaking through to the next stage would be countless times lower. From this, it was obvious how precious this technique was to them, and it was obvious how valuable it was to them. When Luo Fan obtained this information, with a single thought, he already understood the difference. As such, after he sorted out the information, he directly imprinted it into his memory so that he could take it out at any time and even turn it into a specialized cultivation method at any time. However, that was only a matter for the future. At this moment, he worked hard to push the stars in the starry sky to slowly revolve according to the various structures described in the information. Gradually, these star-like lights formed an indescribable connection with each other. The connection was extremely weak, but as soon as it appeared, it was as if they were born together. Even time could not sever them, and it was the strongest connection that no power in the universe could isolate. As Luo Fan pushed, the connection became stronger and more obvious. In the end, when all the lights revolved like a top, the connection was so obvious that even an idiot could sense it. Invisible and thick channels of communication crisscrossed in the starry sky, forming a strange network. At this moment, Luo Fan's eyes lit up, and his entire spirit violently shook. As he shook, the entire world in his sea of consciousness also violently shook. An unimaginable power was directly generated from this shake, and through all kinds of unbelievable channels, it was transmitted to the starry sky in front of him, which he had worked hard to push and revolve like a top. At this moment, the incomparably close connections turned illusory into reality, instantly revealing its true appearance. The incomparably thick and wondrous connections connected every speck of light, turning every speck of light into an incomparably close whole in a different way. When those connections were combined together, they formed a gigantic human silhouette. Those lights were like the acupuncture points of this humanoid figure, and those connections were like the passageways between these acupuncture points. In other words, they were like the endless meridians in this humanoid figure's body. After this humanoid phantom appeared, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. The pair of arms that had drawn countless mysterious trajectories before slowly lowered, and his entire body also completely relaxed. Although he was relaxed, the figure in front of him did not stop changing because of this. The specks of light in the illusory figure grew brighter and brighter, turning from countless stars to countless suns. Under the light, Luo Fan's entire sea of consciousness was enveloped in a vast expanse of whiteness. Everything that existed in it seemed to be melted in the light, and it was difficult to see. Even so, the light didn't stop and wasn't completely blocked. Instead, it continued to shine outwards, directly passing through the sea of consciousness and shining outside. Then it passed through Luo Fan's body and shone in the primordial world. Such a change seemed to suddenly erupt with endless light that illuminated the world from Luo Fan's head, directly enveloping the void within a radius of tens of millions of kilometers. It was extremely mysterious. Fortunately, although the light seemed to be the light of the sun, it was not the true essence of the sun and the true flames of the sun. As a result, even though he was illuminated by such a strong light, neither his sea of consciousness nor his body suffered any damage. Instead, because of this illumination, he felt as if he had gained some enlightenment, as if some invisible impurities had been expelled by the light. The light appeared very quickly, but it did not disappear slowly either. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. At that moment, in Luo Fan's sea of consciousness, the figure had completely disappeared. It turned into a human-shaped life that was less than 10 feet tall, and it floated naked in front of Luo Fan's spirit. The human-shaped life was a man. He had a handsome face and a strong body. Every tremble of his muscles seemed to be able to cause some kind of mysterious response in the void. Clearly, it contained incredible power. Most importantly, there was a vertical eye between the man's eyebrows that ordinary people did not have. This man had 3 eyes. # free ebook download. Chapter 708. The third, I was slightly closed at this moment. As it opened and closed, an extremely deep light shone out from it. All space-time was illuminated by this light, and it seemed as if all secrets had been completely taken by this light, no longer being able to keep any secrets. First text, free download of an ebook. This figure was tall and muscular, and the lines on his body were extremely perfect. It seemed as if every rise and fall and every vibration of his muscles contained the supreme secrets of endless space-time. Looking at his appearance, there were extremely strong traces of Luo Fan, as if it was Luo Fan's appearance that had been formed after some changes. At this moment, the aura around the three-eyed person seemed extraordinary, but whether it was the strength of his body or the strength of his soul, it was only like that of an ordinary person. At most, it was just that the materials and energy used to construct it were of an extremely high level, so its aptitude had reached an unimaginable level. Not to mention compared to Luo Fan at this moment. Even if he was compared to any innate god in the primordial world, he was countless of times inferior. If he were to appear in the primordial world at this moment, then even a wave of violent fluctuation of energy might cause his soul to disperse and completely vanish into nothingness. This body was actually not a living being, but a magic treasure that Luo Fan had refined. It was an extremely strange magic treasure that did not have any characteristics of a magic treasure other than a complete spiritual consciousness. It did not have the power of any magic treasure, and it was even far inferior to the power of even the weakest magic treasure. However, it had a spiritual consciousness that was no different from living beings, and it also had the characteristics that living beings could continuously improve through self-cultivation. In other words, this was a completely new magic treasure that was a living magic treasure. In the eyes of any cultivator, this kind of magic treasure could already be said to be a real living being. This was because no matter from which angle, it was impossible to see the difference between this magic treasure and a real living being. However, only the owner of this magic treasure, Luo Fan, knew that this thing was just a magic treasure. This was because there were layers of restrictions where the origin of this thing's life was located. These restrictions contained the secrets of the existence of countless living beings. They possessed everything that living beings needed, but they were still restrictions. It was precisely because of this essence that even though this item seemed to be completely the same as a living creature, it was still only a magic treasure. Jilly Boy greets Master. The man slowly opened his eyes and bowed respectfully to Luo Fan. Although he was an extremely muscular man, he called himself a boy. It seemed so natural, as if not calling himself a boy was a form of rebellion against the great Tao. That was the right thing to do. At that moment, the one speaking was none other than the treasure spirit of the treasure. As for the treasure spirit of a magic treasure, no matter how big it looked, even if it was an old man, it was still only a child. After all, as a treasure spirit, no matter how much it looked like a living being, there were still some differences between it and a real living being. This difference meant that these magical treasures could only be magical treasures and not living beings. Thus, they could only call themselves children. This was the rule of the great Tao, not something that Luo Fan had purposely set up. Luo Fan calmly said, "I didn't create you for any important task. You only need to complete one thing, and that is to learn the 9 heavenly scripture within your restrictions." 9 Daybreak. When the child Julie heard Luo Fan's words, his expression did not change. He bowed and stood up. He walked to the side, sat down, and began to cultivate. The 9 heavenly scripture was the cultivation technique that Luo Fan had created through the information of the saint's body. Because it came from a certain saint in the 9 great world, and it had been cultivated to contain that saint's body, Luo Fan had named it the 9 heavenly scripture. The reason why this magic treasure was called 9 Child was because Luo Fan had directly used the name of the cultivation method to name the magic treasure. This magic treasure's name was 9 heavenly scripture. There were no advertisements. From this, it could be seen that the nine-Li child looked no different from an ordinary person. However, in reality, he was only a magic treasure after all. He was still different from a real living being. At the very least, normal living beings would not be able to sit down and cultivate in such a straightforward and naked manner. Luo Fan's cultivation of the Tao heart had already reached the great perfection realm. He did not care about the nine-Li child's actions at all, nor did he have any intention of helping him change his clothes to cover himself. Instead, he looked at the nine-Li child quietly and waited for him to cultivate. The nine-Li child's body contained the power to construct the projection of a saint's body. This power was now hidden within his body. Although he couldn't use it, it was still very powerful. Although he could not use it, as long as he continued to cultivate, the power could continuously transform into his cultivation and support his cultivation. As a result, before the nine-Li child completely absorbed all the power contained in the projection, he did not need to ask for any power from the outside world. Although the projection was only a projection condensed by the primordial world to welcome the arrival of a saint, and the difference between it and a saint was like the difference between heaven and earth, it was only compared to a saint-level existence. The power it contained was so powerful that even a supreme existence at the peak of the zenith heaven metal Tao would not be able to completely absorb it. In other words, as long as the body could not become a chaotic spirit treasure on the same level as the primordial chaos Tao fruit, and could not become a supreme Tao thrown like a cultivator becoming a saint, it would be impossible for it to completely absorb the power contained in the projection. Unless there was a saint refining it, it would be extremely difficult for a magic treasure to become a chaotic spirit treasure. It would be hundreds of millions of times more difficult than becoming a saint. From this, it could be seen that with the power of the projection in his body, the nine-Li child no longer needed to absorb any power from the outside world. To a certain extent, he had become self-sufficient and was not restricted by the external environment. It was precisely because of this that the nine-Li child was sitting cross-legged and cultivating. The power in his body was constantly increasing, but he was not affected at all by the outside world. It was as if he was completely separated from the outside world. This was the world of Luo Fan's sea of consciousness. After the various changes that had happened before, it had fused with his soul. As a result, nothing in the sea of consciousness could escape his senses. The nine-Li child was a magic treasure refined by Luo Fan, so it was no exception. As a result, with just a thought from Luo Fan, all of the changes within the nine-Li boy's body were revealed in his eyes. This included some of the extremely subtle and obscure changes that even the nine-Li boy himself found difficult to detect. In the depths of Julie Child's body, there was an extremely deep and obscure space-time. Strands of strange energy constantly seeped out, washing through Julie Child's body and gradually gathering in his dantian. This strange power was extremely subtle, but every strand of power contained an unimaginable power. Just a strand of it was enough to suppress any loose immortal to the point that they couldn't move. It was even to the extent that if the pressure was just a little bit heavier, that loose immortal would probably collapse and perish. However, such power did not pressure the Julie child in the slightest. Instead, it made Julie boy feel extremely comfortable. He felt that his body and spiritual sense had obtained incredible benefits from the cleansing of this power. According to the nine-Li heavenly scripture, which was recorded in the depths of his restriction, he continuously circulated the power in his dantian, allowing it to slowly flow out of his dantian. It began to slowly circulate in his body according to a mysterious and extremely complicated path. As the power circulated, its nature constantly changed. It even caused the nine-Li child's spirit, and body to undergo an extremely subtle change. His cultivation continued to rise at an unimaginable speed during this process. Chi refinement, core formation, divine flame, spirit reversion, and adversity passing. He only spent 9 days and 9 nights before breaking through the 5 great loose immortal realms. After 9 days and 9 nights, the Ninely boy had already become an existence at the peak of the crossing disaster realm. His body was tens of thousands of times stronger than when he was first created. The power that seeped out from the deep space-time in his body had completely changed form, turning into a mysterious yuan energy that contained endless power. This power was even over 100 times more powerful than the power of the Tao fruit realm before it became an immortal Tao. Due to the boundless power in his body, the power of the Ninely child's ability was pushed to an unimaginable level for adversity passing. It was even more powerful than ordinary loose immortals. Even loose immortals who cultivated the Tao fruit realm might only be able to put up a stalemate against him. If news of the power of the ability spread, it would be enough to stun anyone. It would make them willing to give up everything for the Ninely heaven scripture. However, that was only for ordinary people. For the Julie child and Luo fan, who were watching the Julie child cultivate, it wasn't worth mentioning at all. The man and treasure didn't pay any attention to it all. After all, both of them knew very well that the reason the child of Julie was able to cultivate the heavenly scripture of Julie to the peak below the immortal Tao in 9 days and 9 nights was because of the power that seeped out from an extremely deep and mysterious space-time in the depths of his body. This power was the power that formed the projection of the saint. Its level was so high that it far exceeded the imagination of all living beings. It was because of this high level of power that the Ninely child was able to condense the origin energy of the Ninely heaven scripture so easily and push his cultivation to the peak of adversity passing so easily. If other cultivators cultivated the Ninely heaven scripture, they would need who knows how many tens of thousands of years to cultivate the origin energy required. If they wanted to push the Ninely heaven scripture to adversity passing, it would probably take another tens of thousands of years. As a result, it was better to directly cultivate other cultivation methods. If they cultivated other cultivation methods, it would only take tens of thousands of years to reach adversity passing from nothing. If they were lucky and cultivated a cultivation method that was suitable for them, they would even be able to do it in a few hundred years. In comparison, the Ninely heaven scripture was not worth it for ordinary cultivators. It was not worth it for them to pursue. It was because he understood this that Luo Fan was not moved by the fact that the Ninely heaven scripture could push the Ninely child to the peak of adversity passing so quickly. He did not want to pass down the Ninely heaven scripture for his own disciples to cultivate. The Ninely child was already a magic treasure. Although it was a magic treasure that focused all its power on spiritual sense and talent, it did not have any power or cultivation. It was still a magic treasure after all. It was a magic treasure that transcended life and death and was equivalent to an itinerant immortal. Since that was the case, the bottleneck between adversity passing and earthly immortal was naturally extremely weak. As a result, the Ninely child did not prepare much. With just a collision of origin energy, it naturally broke through the bottleneck. Its origin energy instantly transformed into a type of magic power that was completely different from Luo Fan's magic power and any Tao fruit's magic power. This kind of magic power was condensed into one. There were no tiny units inside it. It was as if it was already the finest, purest, and most complete whole. It could not be further divided. The transformation of origin energy into magic power naturally led to changes in the Ninely child's body, spiritual sense, sea of consciousness, and soul. In an instant, the Ninely child's body trembled, and the third eye between his eyebrows suddenly opened. A mysterious and deep light rushed out of the eye and swept in all directions. Wherever the light swept, the structure of time and space seemed to unfold without any reservation. It was as if at this moment, all the mysteries of the universe were completely absorbed by the light and were instantly understood by the Ninely child. Even Luo Fan could not help but feel as if some of his body's secrets were being taken in by the light. However, this feeling was very slight. Luo Fan only had a slight thought, and he knew that this light had not invaded his body at all. It had only slightly touched his body. Not to mention the secret of his body, even if it wanted to really touch his body, it would not be able to do so. However, this had already made Luo Fan feel inexplicably shocked. After all, the Ninely Child had only just broken through the adversity stage and attained the immortal Tao, and he wasn't even an immortal cultivator yet. Compared to Luo Fan, he was weak to the point he could simply be ignored. However, such a weak existence was actually able to touch his body with his gaze. This had simply surpassed the great Tao and transcended the laws. How could he not be shocked? So this is the true saint's eye. Previously, I used the third eye of the saint's body to observe the universe's space-time, but I'm afraid I only used a tiny bit of its power. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Although the gaze seemed to have seen through all the mysteries of the universe, in reality, it did not gain much. After all, this was not anywhere else but Luo Fan's sea of consciousness. If it was anywhere else, even the primordial world, the light of the third eye would definitely be able to obtain the endless mysteries of the primordial world spacetime. It would even be able to obtain all sorts of incredible abilities and power. It would be able to do countless things that independent immortals could not do in the primordial world. However, in Luo Fan's sea of consciousness, the situation was completely different. The sea of consciousness had already fused with Luo Fan. It could be said that the sea of consciousness was Luo Fan's soul. On the other hand, the Julie Child's third eye could not truly come into contact with Luo Fan's soul. Under such circumstances, how could he see through the sea of consciousness that was also his soul? It was already extremely rare to be able to gain something. However, the changes to the Ninely Child did not stop because of this. The Ninely Child let out a long roar, and his body involuntarily floated up. The light of his third eye shot up into the sky as he raised his head. It was as if it wanted to illuminate the sky and see the truth beyond the sky. His body involuntarily stretched out, as if he wanted to try his best to bring the entire world into his arms. Then, the sound of silk ripping could be heard. 2 pairs of arms suddenly grew out from under the Ninely Child's ribs. These 2 pairs of arms were exactly the same as the original arms. They were just as tough and powerful. With a slight turn, it was no longer possible to tell which 2 pairs of arms were the original arms and which 2 pairs of arms had just appeared. After the 2 pairs of arms grew out, the junction between the Ninely Child's shoulders and neck shook. 2 heads suddenly popped out. These 2 heads were exactly the same as the original head. After they appeared, they also raised their heads and opened their third eyes, shooting out a beam of light that seemed to illuminate the world. Then the 3 heads turned slightly. It was also impossible to tell which one was the original and which 2 had just grown out. As the 4 arms and 2 heads grew out, the Ninely Child turned into a 3-headed, 6-armed body in the blink of an eye. The magic power in his body instantly increased by 100 times, and the strength of his body also increased by more than 100 times. In the blink of an eye, he had completely stepped into the rogue immortal realm. In fact, he had even reached the peak of the rogue immortal realm. He could barely fight against true immortals who cultivated the Tao fruit. 3 heads and 6 arms was originally an extremely deformed body. However, when Luo Fan looked at the Ninely Child's 3-headed, 6-armed body, he felt a sense of perfection wash over him. The 3-headed, 6-armed body did not have the slightest bit of disharmony. The entire body looked extremely perfect. Compared to it, it seemed like a normal person with 1 head and 2 arms was not perfect. So this is the true 3-headed, 6-armed body. A strange thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Hashtag free ebook download. Chapter 709. The cultivation of the 3 heads and 6 arms technique was not an unbelievable mystical ability to Luo Fan. Text starter. No advertisements, full text, updates back then, when he obtained Pangu's primordial spirit and used all his memories to create the endless technique, the 3-headed, 6-armed body was already included in it. Even the 3 eyes technique did not exceed the scope of those techniques. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the 3-headed, 6-armed body and the third eye that the Ninely Child had appeared should not contain any incomprehensible mysteries to him. He did not need to have such thoughts because of that. However, The three-headed, six-armed body and the three-eyes technique that he had created were fundamentally different from the three-headed, six-armed body and the three-eyes technique that the ninely child had cultivated. This difference was extremely huge. Apart from the slight similarity between the two, there was nothing else in common. The three-headed, six-armed, three-eyed technique was a mystical ability that many immortals possessed in myths and legends. Although this mystical ability was magical, in Luo fans' impression, at least in the legends, it was just an ordinary mystical ability. Although it could greatly increase the combat power of immortals, it was not like there was no way to resist it. Even the power of the three eyes technique was only able to see through illusions and see through all kinds of concealment. Even if it was said to be able to see through the heavens and see through the nine hells, it was only able to unleash these abilities to a certain limit. Although these powers were magical, they were not unbelievable compared to the power of the mystical abilities of immortals. However, at that moment, the three-headed, six-armed body and the three-eyes technique that appeared on the ninely child's body were definitely not something that the power of the mystical abilities that Luo Fan had deduced in the past could compare to. The three-headed, six-armed body that appeared on the ninely child's body was not a mystical ability, but a cultivation technique of the Great Tao. It was a supreme cultivation technique that led straight to the level of the primordial spirit and transcended the world. When he cultivated this dharma to the limit, he would be immortal even if the world decayed, and he would not perish even if the world was destroyed. Even if the primordial world disappeared without a trace, he would be able to continue living in the chaotic state and would never be harmed. From a certain point of view, this sort of cultivation technique wasn't any weaker than Luo Fan's Tao fruit at all. How could the three heads and six arms divine ability that Luo Fan had created in the past compare to this? Furthermore, the three eyes art could be separated, and it could also be treated as a component of the three heads and six arms body. If it was looked at separately, then the three eyes technique was a supreme technique of the eyes. When cultivated to the peak, one would possess the eyes of a saint, and one would be able to see through everything. Thus, one would obtain the supreme might of omniscient and omniscient like a saint. To a certain extent, one would already be close to a saint. Even if one could not rely on the three eyes technique to achieve immortality, it could reduce the difficulty of achieving immortality by hundreds of millions of times. How could the three eyes technique that Luo Fan had created previously, which could only allow one to see through illusions and see through all kinds of disguises, compare to it? It was precisely because he realized this that Luo Fan sighed with emotion that the three heads and six arms body in front of him was the real three heads and six arms body. I wonder if the three heads and six arms body created by the saint in the legendary primordial world is the one I created before, or this one. I wonder why they created such a technique. This question suddenly flashed across Luo Fan's mind. As soon as this question appeared, he suddenly felt that the primordial world legend that he thought was extremely clear in the past was suddenly shrouded in a faint layer of fog. It seemed that there was a deeper secret in the primordial world legend, a secret that he did not want to believe, but was very likely to be the truth. This secret was unacceptable to Luo Fan, but in fact, it was not difficult for him to think of it. In the primordial world legend, there was no existence related to the Julie Great World, nor were there any traces of foreign creatures appearing in the primordial world. It was as if the primordial world was the only world in the entire chaotic state, and it was the most high-level existence in the entire chaotic state. This understanding penetrated all the legends. Even if there were differences, it was only in the legends of some major thousand worlds, medium thousand worlds, and minor thousand worlds under the primordial world. This understanding was obviously worlds apart from the real truth. Even at the beginning of the primordial world, there were existences from the Julie Great World who had infiltrated the primordial world through some methods that Luo Fan still did not understand. In the end, they were discovered by Luo Fan by chance and died. However, because of their death, the saint's will of the Julie Great World descended, causing the four-faced and eight-armed existence at the peak of the Zenith Heaven Golden Path to descend into the primordial world not long ago. Obviously, Luo Fan did not exist in the legends of the primordial world. It was because of the existence of Luo Fan that the existence that had infiltrated the Julie Great World had been exposed in the primordial world. In that case, there was probably only one reason why there was no legend of the Julie Great World in the legends of the primordial world. The existence of the Julie Great World had integrated into the primordial world and might even have occupied an unimaginably high position. It might even have controlled the primordial world, causing the primordial world to be controlled by the Julie Great World from a certain point of view. This secret was so sensational, but it could be figured out with just a little thought. Although Lu Fatsi did not dare to believe it, he vaguely felt that this secret probably existed. If this secret existed, then the cultivation method of the 3 heads and 6 arms technique and the 3 eyes technique would naturally appear. After all, other than a saint, he could not think of any other person who could occupy an unimaginably high position that could hide it from the entire primordial world. No living creature in the primordial world, not even a saint, not even Hong Jun, could know of the existence of the Julie Great World. Since he was a saint, then it was naturally not just a matter of a thought for him to create a cultivation method that was similar to the body of a saint that he had seen in the Julie Great World. From the existence of the 3 heads and 6 arms technique and the 3 eyes technique, Luo Fan suddenly saw an incomparably huge Yin shadow enveloping the primordial world. This Yin shadow was so huge that it made Luo Fan feel like he couldn't resist it at this time. If that's really the case, then I'll just make that 4-faced, 8-armed existence retreat. I won't let the Julie Great World stop. After all, there will be even more powerful people from the Julie Great World coming to the primordial world. At that time, what method should I use to resist? An indescribable sense of vigilance suddenly surged in Luo Fan's mind. In the legends, it was clearly impossible for a single living being from the Julie Great World to be able to control the primordial world so firmly. Since it was not something that could be done by a single living being, there must be an even more powerful force behind that incident. And if such a powerful force wanted to control the primordial world, it must have had a deep consideration. It was impossible for it to give up just because of some speculation from the 4-faced, 8-armed existence. Thinking about this, an indescribable sense of urgency suddenly surged in Luo Fan's heart. As soon as this feeling appeared, he suddenly realized that the matter of the Julie child cultivating the cultivation method of the body of a saint could no longer attract his attention. With a thought, he raised his hand and waved his soul. The Julie child shook slightly and disappeared from his sea of consciousness. When he reappeared, he directly appeared in the Void Wuji Palace, in the only colossal world. The colossal world was the highest and most powerful world in the Void Wuji Palace. The level of this world was so high that it could even accommodate countless cultivators in the 3 realms of primordial unity to cultivate. Not to mention that the Julie child did not need to absorb energy from the outside world. Even if he did, it would be enough for him to cultivate to the 3 realms of primordial heaven. Although the Julie child could only rely on 9 days and 9 nights to become an itinerant immortal from an ordinary person, at this time his cultivation speed had gradually begun to slow down. It was absolutely impossible to break through to the itinerant immortal realm without hundreds of years. It was even more impossible to break through to the perfected immortal realm without thousands of years. The following golden immortal realm, Tai itinerant immortal, Tai true immortal, and Tai golden immortal, the time needed to break through each realm was hundreds or even thousands of times more than the previous realm. In the end, if he wanted to break through to the 3 realms of primordial heaven, the difficulty would reach an unimaginable level. After all, although the power hidden in the depths of his body could allow him to cultivate without external help, there was no shortcut to the improvement of his cultivation realm. He was a magic weapon refined by Luo Fan and had a trace of Luo Fan's cultivation. Therefore, before the 3 realms of primordial heaven, the bottleneck to break through was tens of thousands of times weaker than that of ordinary cultivators. But after all, what he had obtained was only a trace of Luo Fan's cultivation, and Luo Fan was, after all, only in the true path of the great Luo. It was extremely rare that a trace of his cultivation could weaken the bottleneck before the zenith heaven. How could it affect the bottleneck to break through to the zenith heaven from primordial heaven? Therefore, if the Julie child wanted to become a Daluo heaven treasure, although it was much easier to break through than a normal magic weapon, it was no less difficult than a normal cultivator becoming a disbanded immortal of the great all-embracing heaven. Therefore, it could be said that if the Julie child wanted to cultivate a Daluo heaven treasure in the boundless Void Palace's vast thousand world, it would take hundreds of billions of years to be able to achieve it. And at that time, to what extent would Luo Fan's cultivation realm be improved, and to what extent would the boundless Void Palace be improved? Who could say for sure? Naturally, there was no need to worry that the vast thousand world would be damaged because of the Julie child's cultivation in it. The Julie child did not care about Luo Fan's actions at all. When the void changed, he still had 3 heads and 6 arms, and the light emitted by his 3/3 eyes still shot straight into the sky, trying hard to see through all the mysteries of the universe. However, although the boundless Void Palace was only one of Luo Fan's magic weapons, it was completely integrated with Luo Fan. From another point of view, it could also be said to be a part of Luo Fan. Therefore, although his 3/3 eyes could see through many more mysteries in the vast thousand world than in the sea of knowledge, it was impossible to gain as much as it did in the outside world. Even through the vast thousand world, he could not see the other medium and small thousand worlds. He could not even see the true appearance of the boundless Void Palace. After a while, the Julie child came back to his senses. The light emitted by the 3/3 eyes gradually converged and finally disappeared. He slowly lowered his 3 heads, and his body swayed slightly. His 6 arms grabbed the void in an extremely agile manner, and the void of the vast thousand world seemed to have become bouncy rubber. With a light grab, the void changed shape. His body trembled slightly, and the time around him seemed to distort violently. It was as if it had become independent of the vast thousand world, and had become a flow of time that was specially adapted to the Julie child. This flow of time that was specially adapted to the Julie child did not simply speed up, nor did it simply slow down. Instead, it was changing in a very mysterious way, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, and faintly seemed to be doing some kind of mysterious breathing. This method of changing time was only suitable for the Julie child. For other living beings, unless they possessed a divine ability like Luo Fans, once they entered this rhythm of time, they would most likely be directly sensed by the rhythm of time itself and fall into a boundless state of inappropriateness. From then on, they would never be able to truly return to reality. This was the most basic and wondrous power that the 3-headed, 6-armed body brought. This characteristic that called itself space-time and adapted to time was a characteristic that only a sage's body had. Of course, the Julie child had only just become an itinerant immortal. This characteristic was still extremely weak. Compared to a true sage, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. If a sage's body had this characteristic, it could even affect a perfect world, allowing the entire world's time to naturally adapt to his existence. However, it was precisely because it was so powerful that it did not have much effect on living beings. Because the formidableness of this special trait had already exceeded the limits, and it had even attained the state of being able to affect the rhythm of time of living beings and assimilate it. As a result, even if living beings stepped into it, they would not lose themselves. Instead, they would feel extremely comfortable and at ease. Of course, this was only the effect of this characteristic when it was at its strongest. To omnipotent sages, it was naturally extremely easy to control the strength of this characteristic, its range of influence, and its receptors. If he was willing, the assimilation effect of this characteristic on living beings could be eliminated at any time, although it might cause the living beings of the entire perfect world to completely lose themselves and be completely lost. This was a small reason why sages were invincible. It was also a small reason that could almost be ignored. In reality, at the level of a sage, The form of existence of living beings had already surpassed the world and the great Tao. Even the slightest, simplest, and least special characteristic on their bodies was something that ordinary living beings and cultivators could not bear. It could be said that this was the reason why they were invincible. For example, sages did not breathe in and out spiritual qi. Instead, they breathed in and out the world and Han Yuan. With a single movement, they could even cause a storm of Han Yuan in the perfect world, causing the entire world to become extremely Huan. As a result, all living beings in it, including peak zenith heaven golden path cultivators, would be completely annihilated. Another example was the aura of sages that surpassed the world and the great Tao. A slight tremble could cause the great Tao to change, causing the world to move and change the existence of the world. It could make it unsuitable for any living being to survive, thus erasing all living beings in a perfect world. Hence, from a certain point of view, investigating the fundamental reason why sages were invincible was like an ant considering why a divine dragon was invincible to itself. It was definitely an extremely laughable matter. After the time and space around Jilly Boy changed, his body was at the peak of perfection. Whether it was his body, magic power, soul, or will, they had all reached a peak that could no longer be improved. His entire mind and will were filled with an indescribable sense of freedom. It was as if at this moment he was truly alive. At this moment, he had broken free from all restraints and had become his true self. Even time had changed its rhythm to accommodate him. What else in the great thousand world could truly restrain him? How could he not be at ease? However, there was a price for this kind of freedom. 15 minutes after the great thousand world passed, the boundless magic power in Jilly Boy's body had been completely exhausted. He could no longer maintain his three-headed and six-armed body. Even the third eye between his brows could not open and was tightly shut. The surrounding time and space that was affected by it had returned to its normal state, as if it had never changed. On the other hand, Jilly Boy had also broken free from that extremely free and unrestrained state. He once again felt the boundless restraint, as well as the restriction of time and space that was everywhere. If Jilly Boy had never experienced that kind of freedom, he would naturally not feel much about it. However, after experiencing that indescribable freedom, the feeling of being restrained by time and space made him feel extremely uncomfortable. He even wanted to roar at the sky to vent his depression and irritation. Fortunately, he was a treasure that had cultivated to the itinerant immortal realm. During the process of cultivation, his mental state had also been tempered. At this moment, his mental state was quite extraordinary. Thus, in the blink of an eye, he had already suppressed the depression and irritation. Letting out a long breath, he slowly relaxed his body. He did not choose any other place and directly sat down on a mountain in the great thousand world. He slowly circulated his cultivation technique and touched a certain mysterious space in the depths of his body, causing strands of strange energy to surge out. This allowed strands of magic power to be slowly produced in his body, gradually filling up his body and replenishing the exhaustion that had almost exhausted him. Hashtag Chapter 710. Jilly Child was currently in the major kiliacosm within the limitless Void Palace. Naturally, everything that happened there could not escape Luo Fan's senses. Thus, he could see all the strange powers brought about by Jilly Child's three-headed and six-armed body. As a result, the strange power that the Ninely Child's three-headed, six-armed body brought was directly seen by him. Even though he did not pay much attention to Jilly Child, he could not help but sigh at the power of the saint's body. However, it was just a sigh. No matter how powerful the saint's body was, it did not mean much to him at that moment. However, he had more important things to do. With a slight thought, his consciousness returned to his body. He raised his eyes to look at the sky. His eyes pierced through the endless distance and space-time. He saw Luo Fu's family of 4, who were hidden in the core of the light realm and had used the power of the leap when the light realm transformed from a minor kiliacosm to a medium kiliacosm to increase their cultivation realm. In his eyes, the auras of the 4 of them the power in their bodies, and the changes in their souls and their sea of consciousness were not concealed at all. He could easily see through them. It is inevitable that Fu-Er will obtain the Grand Unity Tao fruit. Although it is more difficult for Guangpu, it is not a big problem. After all, Chunyang and Gua's cultivation realm is too low. At most, they can only become golden immortals. It is a pity that this opportunity has been lost. In an instant, Luo Fan had already comprehended the benefits that the four of them could obtain by using the power of the Light Realm Leap. After understanding this, he no longer cared about how they comprehended the mysteries. He raised his hand and waved. Several figures appeared in front of him. They were Lei Jiuxiao, Guling, and Lin Tunnan, as well as the three Khanate gods under Luo Fan. When Luo Fan collected the surviving living beings of the primordial world, the six of them had already been taken into the universe in Luo Fan's sleeve. In these hundreds of thousands of years, they had been staying in the universe in Luo Fan's sleeve. Although they could stay awake, it was difficult for them to cultivate, and they could not improve their cultivation realm at all. This was naturally much worse than Luo Fu. However, compared to the other living beings who were muddle-headed and even felt that time had frozen, they were many times better. When the six of them appeared here, they noticed Luo Fan at first glance. They immediately acted like Luo Fu and the others. Before they noticed the changes in the surroundings of the great wasteland, they turned over and kowtowed, paying their respects. Luo Fan smiled slightly, raised his hand, and lifted them up. He said, "This time, the great tribulation of the heavens and earth covers a wide area. I, your master, cannot protect you. I can only keep you in my sleeve. Don't be dissatisfied." When they heard Luo Fan's words, they naturally called him Master and Master Merciful. They would not be dissatisfied. They even wanted to dig out their hearts for Luo Fan to show that they were not lying. Luo Fan only glanced at them casually and smiled. He said, "Fortunately, the primordial world is still in the aftermath of the tribulation. The various changes have not completely stabilized. You can also carefully observe it. You will definitely obtain countless benefits. Here, I have a technique that can help you comprehend the changes." As he spoke, his thoughts moved slightly. There was no need for him to move. Endless light and shadows condensed in the void. In the blink of an eye, a large number of words and images condensed in front of him. They duplicated and split, turning into 6 rays of light. They directly rushed into the 6 people's sea of consciousness, allowing them to instantly understand the various mysteries recorded in those words and images. The technique on it was none other than a technique that Luo Fan had created previously. It was a technique that used the power of the mysterious existence that controlled the tribulation of the world to nourish himself. However, there were some slight changes. He removed some of the changes that Lei Jiuxiao and the rest could not understand at their current cultivation realm, and added many methods of application. This change had greatly reduced the effects of the technique. At most, it could only activate the skin of the mysterious existence that Luo Fan could activate. What Luo Fan could activate was already the skin of the mysterious existence. Therefore, it was naturally impossible to use this technique to prove one's Tao and become a saint. However, even so, this technique was already unimaginably profound compared to the various techniques that the few of them had comprehended before. Perhaps only the techniques that Luo Fan had imparted back then could compare to it. Such a profound and indescribable technique was enough for them to spend their entire lives comprehending it. At the very least, it was naturally not difficult for them to break through their current realm. Therefore, after sensing this technique, Lei Jiuxiao and the rest only felt an indescribable joy. They were overjoyed and bowed again, thanking Luo Fan for imparting the technique. Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand to help them up. He said, Go. This opportunity is really rare. If you delay any longer, it will be difficult to find it after it passes." When they heard that, they hurriedly bowed to Luo Fan again. Then, following their own wills, they left for various parts of the primordial world. Only Lei Jiuxiao lagged behind. After the others disappeared, Lei Jiuxiao returned and returned to Luo Fan. Luo Fan was not surprised by Lei Jiuxiao's arrival at all. He looked at Lei Jiuxiao with a smile and did not speak. He waited for Lei Jiuxiao. Lei Jiuxiao was initially hesitant, but when he saw Luo Fan's gentle expression, he gritted his teeth and bowed to Luo Fan. He said, "I have a question in my heart. It has been suppressed for hundreds of thousands of years. I wonder if Master can explain it to me?" As he spoke, he kowtowed and did not get up, waiting for Luo Fan's answer. Luo Fan stopped smiling and sighed. "You really did say it out loud. I thought you had already thought it through. Master's abilities are limitless. You must know what I want to ask. I beg Master to explain it to me," Lei Jiuxiao said resolutely. Although he kowtowed, he gave off an extremely stubborn aura, as if he would not give up until he obtained an answer. Seeing this, Luo Fan sighed again and raised his hand. Lei Jiuxiao stood up involuntarily. During the entire process, he did not even have the slightest intention to resist. He felt that only by standing up could he better express his thoughts. It was as if he was born to stand and not kneel on the ground. This situation was simply inconceivable to the demon ancestor who had controlled billions of demons for hundreds of yuanwei. After all, to all living beings in the untainted land, the demon ancestor Lei Jiuxiao was one of the two most powerful people in the entire untainted land apart from the Tao Master. How could such a powerful existence not be able to kneel? However, at this very moment, everything seemed so natural. Even Lei Jiuxiao himself couldn't come up with any unacceptable ideas. After all, he, who had been included in the spirit space by Luo Fan for tens of millions of years, knew better than anyone else, including Hong Jun, Luo Fu, and even Lin Tiannan, who regarded Luo Fan's omnipotence as a belief. Therefore, even though he was already at the peak of the golden immortal realm and had even felt the power of primordial unity countless times, he still knew clearly that he was not even an ant in front of his master. His master could completely erase his existence with a thought and destroy all his efforts for tens of thousands of years. Under such circumstances, he naturally did not have the slightest doubt about what was happening at this moment. You must be asking why I was so biased towards your second senior brother in the battle between you and your second senior brother. Luo Fan sighed. That's exactly what I'm asking. Knowing that he could not resist Master's will, Lei Jiuxiao no longer insisted on kneeling. However, this was the third time he asked Master to forgive him. Obviously, this doubt had been suppressed in his heart for many years. This was also inevitable. Although Luo Fu was Master's son, he was also Master's disciple. Lei Jiuxiao naturally understood and expected that Master would be biased towards his second senior brother in the battle between him and second senior brother. However, Luo Fan's bias was too obvious and exaggerated. That bias was almost to the point of defeating Lei Jiuxiao himself. How could Lei Jiuxiao accept it when it was so obvious and exaggerated? It was already considered that he was strong-willed and rational, that he did not harbor any resentment in his heart. Hearing Lei Jiuxiao's words, Luo Fan shook his head and said, "Disciple Jiuxiao, look at the primordial world. It is so vast and boundless, but the living beings in the entire world, even at the most prosperous time, are sparse compared to the entire world. Do you know how rare it is for me to be able to obtain a few of you as my disciples in such a desolate world?" As he spoke, Luo Fan pointed casually, and the entire primordial world seemed to be directly laid out in front of Lei Jiuxiao. Lei Jiuxiao was naturally influenced by it and felt his state of mind, as well as the primordial world in Luo Fan's eyes. At this moment, Luo Fan had already attained the Zenith Heaven Truth Tao. Although he had only just stepped into it, his cultivation realm, the power of his divine abilities, and the senses of his eyes had already surpassed Lei Jiuxiao, who was at the peak of the golden immortal realm, by countless times. Under such circumstances, the world in Luo Fan's eyes was naturally indescribably shocking to Lei Jiuxiao. It instantly affected Lei Jiuxiao, making him suddenly feel that the dissatisfaction and doubt in his heart were so insignificant and not worth mentioning compared to the entire world. He murmured, I understand. It is the luckiest thing in my life to be able to find Master and become Master's disciple in this vast world. Since you know how rare and lucky it is for us to be Master and disciple, you naturally understand that in Master's eyes, all of you are the people closest to Master. Although your second senior brother is Master's son, there is not much difference between how I treat him and how I treat all of you. Luo Fan sighed. Then why? Lei Jiuxiao was stunned when he heard that, but there was still stubbornness in his eyes. After being tempered in the minor thousand world for tens of millions of years, Lei Jiuxiao's heart had already reached a state of near perfection. However, such a perfect state of mind did not mean that he would be at ease and in front of everyone at any time, as if everything was under his control. In reality, the perfection of his heart only allowed him to see through the ways of the world, so he didn't have much doubt in his heart. That was why he could be calm and confident. Even if he was occasionally doubtful and puzzled, he would be able to maintain his calm by suppressing his heart. At this moment, there was a strong sense of confusion in his heart, and there was doubt that had been suppressed at the bottom of his heart for tens of thousands of years. Moreover, the person in front of him was his master, the only person he cared about in this world. Naturally, he would not act as carefree as he did in front of others, as if everything was under his control. As a result, he behaved like an ordinary person right now. He didn't hide anything or put on any pretense. This was the truest reaction of his heart. Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, "This is the general trend of the world. Don't tell me you still can't understand it. If I didn't help your second senior brother, how could the disaster of the world be controlled so smoothly? How could the primordial world appear like this after the disaster?" Luo Fan's words were very simple, but they were like a bolt of lightning. They immediately tore through the doubts that had accumulated in Lei Jiuxiao's heart for hundreds of thousands of years. In an instant, countless lights and shadows flashed across his mind, causing him to be drenched in sweat. If second senior brother's strength wasn't equal to mine back then, what form would the disaster of the world have taken? Lei Jiuxiao immediately had an answer to this question. The disaster of the world was not something that could be eliminated by human power. Lei Jiuxiao naturally did not have that kind of tribulation. If Luo Fu's strength had been far weaker than his, he would not have shattered the endless starry sky and caused the stars to fall. His supreme cultivation made him understand that even if he had easily defeated Luo Fu back then, the disaster of the world would still have taken place. Moreover, it might have taken different form. Perhaps there would have been a sudden split among the demons. Perhaps some race would have suddenly risen out of nowhere. Perhaps the world would have suddenly suffered an impact and collapsed. Lei Jiuxiao's thoughts moved extremely quickly. In that instant, the primordial world had already collapsed thousands of times in his mind. Each time, the process was many times more severe than the great tribulation of the heavens and earth. The possibility of triggering a great tribulation was far more dangerous and difficult to control than the process of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. After all these thoughts flashed through his mind, Lei Jiuxiao finally came to a realization. As cold sweat poured down his face, shame appeared in his eyes. He directly knelt before Luo Fan and said, "I am ashamed. Only now do I understand Master's intentions, Master. I was actually dissatisfied before. I deserve to die 10,000 times for my sins. Master, please punish me." Luo Fan did not stop Lei Jiuxiao from kneeling, so Lei Jiuxiao's mind broke through the remnants of Luo Fan's will and made him kneel on the ground. Luo Fan's cultivation realm was unfathomable. He could see the true feelings of all living beings. As a result, he could tell that Lei Jiuxiao's words came from the bottom of his heart and were not mere pleasantries. He could not help but feel gratified. He smiled and said, "There's no need to punish me. It's only natural for you to have such thoughts. If you want to blame someone, blame me for not explaining things clearly to you earlier." With that, he raised his hand again. Lei Jiuxiao once again stood up uncontrollably without the slightest intention of resisting. "Master, there's no need to comfort me. This matter is of great importance. If I had explained things clearly beforehand, They might have led to unpredictable changes and severe consequences. How could I have explained things clearly? This is my fault. Master, please punish me. Otherwise, I won't feel at ease and won't be able to cultivate in peace, late Jiu Xiao said with a flushed face. His words were extremely sincere. Luo Fan could clearly sense just how determined his will was. Seeing how determined Lei Jiuxiao was, Luo Fan could not say anything else. He could only sigh and say, "If that's the case, I'll give you a little punishment so that you can calm down." "Thank you, Master." Lei Jiuxiao was overjoyed. After understanding the deeper meaning behind Luo Fan's actions, he no longer doubted Luo Fan's intentions. He believed that Luo Fan was too biased towards his second senior brother and that he had hurt Lei Jiuxiao's feelings. He believed that he had let down his master and that he was not worthy of being his master's disciple. In this case, if Luo Fan didn't punish him and just let him off lightly, or even comforted him with gentle words, he would feel a serious uneasiness in his heart. He would feel that his behavior was really bad, and his mind would be unable to calm down. This was simply fatal for a cultivator. Naturally, he was looking forward to Luo Fan imposing a certain punishment on him and making him pay for his previous thoughts. Only in this way could he reduce his sense of guilt and calm down his mind. Only then would he be able to cultivate in a better place. As a result, Lei Jiuxiao's request for Luo Fan to punish him came from the bottom of his heart. Luo Fan had seen this, which was why he had agreed to punish Lei Jiuxiao. Of course, this was only a punishment in name. Lei Jiuxiao needed this punishment to calm his mind, but it was impossible for Luo Fan to impose punishment on Lei Jiuxiao just because of his misunderstanding. There is a certain degree of control in this. This degree of control might be extremely difficult for others, but for Luo Fan, it was extremely easy. He had millions of ways to inflict punishment on Lei Jiuxiao, but in fact, it was a form of training for him, allowing him to gain benefits from this punishment and obtain methods to improve himself. At this moment, Luo Fan casually pointed at Lei Jiuxiao and said, "Master will punish you by not using the Son of Heaven's clone for the next 100 generations." With that, a mysterious power descended on Lei Jiuxiao, directly sealing some mysterious existence in him. In a flash, Lei Jiuxiao completely lost the connection he had with the Son of Heaven Phone, the Son of Heaven Lei, and the Son of Heaven Jerome clones that he had painstakingly cultivated. It was as if he had never cultivated the 3 clones in the first place. For Lei Jiuxiao, such a punishment was equivalent to crippling a large portion of his battle strength. It was extremely heavy. However, Lei Jiuxiao did not complain at all. Instead, he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Thank you for fulfilling my wish, Master." Chapter 711. The 3 clones were extremely important to Lei Jiuxiao. It was almost a summary of Lei Jiuxiao's achievements after he broke away from the various methods taught by Luo Fan. First text, its power might be nothing to Luo Fan, but to Lei Jiuxiao, it was not only the supreme magical power for him to overcome the tribulation and destroy demons, but it was also what he relied on to achieve his own Tao in the future. Under such circumstances, the 3 clones were sealed by Luo Fan. To Lei Jiuxiao, this punishment was extremely severe. It was almost related to whether he could have his own Tao in the future. However, even so, Lei Jiuxiao was completely relaxed at this moment. His mind became extremely clear. He bowed to Luo Fan and left. Luo Fan smiled and said, Go. This is a rare opportunity. Don't waste it." Lei Jiuxiao bowed, turned into a long rainbow, and left in the direction his intuition pointed him to. Although the might of these 3 clones is ordinary, they contain a deep level of profundity. It's a seed of the Grand Tao. With your current cultivation realm, it's impossible for you to comprehend that profundity. If you continue to use it, you'll instead be in complete darkness. When you possess the cultivation realm to comprehend that profundity, you'll instead be unable to comprehend it. After 100 Yuan Wei, you might have the cultivation realm to comprehend that mystery. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. He naturally did not seal Lei Jiuxiao's 3 clones to punish Lei Jiuxiao. Instead, he realized that the 3 clones had the potential to become Lei Jiuxiao's own Dao. They were the seeds of a Dao. Therefore, he used the opportunity of punishment to help Lei Jiuxiao nourish and strengthen that Dao. In order to let Lei Jiuxiao grow to the level of Hongjun, he could break away from the Dao he taught and find a Dao that was suitable for him. Compared to before Lei Jiuxiao and the others were kept in the heaven and earth in the sleeve by Luo Fan, the primordial world had undergone a tremendous change. Apart from a very small number of traces, they almost thought that this was a completely different world. When Lei Jiuxiao and the others met Luo Fan, they weren't in the mood to pay attention to the surroundings. They only knew that Luo Fan was in front of them. However, after they left Luo Fan, they couldn't help but be shocked by the mysterious and indescribable primordial world that was completely different from what they'd seen in the past. He only felt that everything in front of him was so mysterious, so novel. The few of them were all extremely profound in terms of cultivation, and with the various kinds of exquisite and indescribable flying techniques passed down by Luo Fan, the speed of their flying naturally did not need to be described. Several days later, the 6 of them, including Lei Jiuxiao, arrived at their respective destinations. Some of these places were located on one of the 1,296 continents in the Great Desolate Land. Some of them were located in the void, the boundary between the Great Desolate Land and the Starry Sky. Some of them were located in the boundless Starry Sky, and some of them were located in the boundless ocean. However, no matter where they were, that location would definitely faintly give off an aura that was compatible with them. It would give off a will that could impact their minds and shake their souls. That was why it would guide their instincts and lead them there. Several days had passed since they'd spent traveling. Lei Jiuxiao and the others naturally wouldn't waste any more time. Instead, they activated the technique that Luo Fan had passed down to them at their destination without any hesitation. The technique was extremely profound, and the intricacies within it almost surpassed all the cultivation techniques they'd seen in the past. Fortunately, the technique was of the same lineage as the Wei fruit. Even Zhongwan, Tianyi, and Luxia seemed to have seen the technique before. As a result, it was not difficult for them to cultivate the technique. As a result, even Zhongwan and the others only spent a few hours to circulate the technique. They could vaguely sense a wondrous existence that was even deeper, vaster, and more profound than the laws of the universe. It was the mysterious existence that controlled the great tribulation of the world in a state of boundless chaos. The mysteriousness of the existence had reached an unimaginable level. Even with the more complicated and intricate techniques that Luo Fan used, he could only activate a sliver of it. The techniques that they used were many times simpler and cruder than Luo Fan's. Naturally, they could only activate a sliver of what Luo Fan had done. In other words, it was just a sliver of the vast existence. It was almost insignificant and could be completely ignored. Among them, Lei Jiuxiao was already at the peak of the golden immortal realm. He was only a thin membrane away from attaining the Tai Dao fruit. It seemed like he could attain the Tai Dao fruit with just a gentle poke. He was the most powerful person among them. Guling, Lin Tiannan, and the others below him might not be as powerful as Lei Jiuxiao, but they were still at the golden immortal realm. However, Guling and Lin Tiannan cultivated the Wei fruit, so they were thousands of times more powerful than Zhongwan, Tianyi, and Luxia, who did not cultivate the Wei fruit. With this level of cultivation, they already stood at the peak of the entire untainted world. However, at this moment, in front of this mysterious existence, they were even more insignificant than ants. This made them suddenly feel how insignificant they were and how long the path ahead of them was. Just this feeling alone made their state of mind improve greatly. It calmed down the restlessness caused by their status at the peak of the untainted world that had occupied it for tens of thousands of years. This clear feeling made them feel that they had gained a lot. They even felt that just the appearance of this feeling without any benefits was enough to make them satisfied and even inexplicably pleasantly surprised. However, the method that Luo Fan taught them naturally could not only have this little benefit. When they sensed the vast and mysterious existence, they vaguely sensed that there seemed to be some inconceivable thing flowing through their bodies through some incomprehensible and unimaginable channel, leaving something on their bodies that they could not detect at all. It was something that did not exist in the first place. Although they could not feel this kind of remnant, they understood that the existence of this remnant would be the second most important opportunity in their lives. The most important opportunity was naturally meeting their master and teacher. When the remnant appeared, they all entered a mysterious and indescribable realm. Although it was also indescribable, the realm that everyone entered was unique and completely different from the others. It was a realm that was the most beneficial to each of them. In that realm, they had a deeper understanding of themselves, the outside world, the untainted world, and everything they had experienced in the past. They felt that they had suddenly gained a vision and perspective that far exceeded their own realm. They could observe everything from a more advanced and mysterious angle. This sort of perspective was naturally extremely beneficial to them. Not only was it able to allow them to comprehend the changes in the outside world with even more acute senses, it even allowed them to gain a deeper understanding of their experiences in the past, and it allowed them to obtain a clearer understanding of the path they should take towards the Tao. Under this change, the six of them completely lost their sense of time. All of their minds were immersed in that perception. They tried their best to comprehend the various changes, and their cultivation realm also slowly increased at an undetectable rate. Luo Fan stood where Buzhou Mountain used to be. His gaze passed through endless space and time and directly saw their performance. He could not help but feel very satisfied. Although their performance did not surprise him, it did not disappoint him. They did not reach their peak with the help of the mysterious existence, but they had roughly unleashed its power. According to their current performance, once the mysterious existence left the primordial world, their cultivation realm would definitely improve tremendously. Even Lei Jiuxiao probably had a 10 to 20% chance of breaking through the earthly immortal Tao fruit and attaining the primordial unity Tao fruit. It should be known that although he was currently at the peak of the golden immortal realm and seemed to be only a thin layer away from the primordial unity Tao fruit, the difficulty of breaking through this thin layer was even more difficult than cultivating from an ordinary person to his current realm. Now that he had a 10 to 20% chance of breaking through, it was already an astonishing improvement. Seeing that they were on the right track, Luo Fan no longer paid attention to them. With a thought, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, he was already 300,000 kilometers above the ground. Looking down, he saw that the edge of the continent below had already faintly appeared in the distance. This continent was not considered large among the 1,296 continents in the untainted world, but it was still trillions of kilometers in circumference. 300,000 kilometers above the ground seemed extremely far, but compared to the size of the continent, it was nothing. To be able to see the edge of the continent from such a distance, Luo Fan's vision was already unimaginably powerful. Naturally, Luo Fan did not come here just to test how powerful his vision was. He came here because the continent was undergoing an inexplicable change. This change was the only way for the untainted world to become complete and stable. It was not something that Luo Fan could stop, and Luo Fan did not have the intention to stop it. When Luo Fan was 300,000 miles above the ground, the incomparably huge and sturdy continent that was filled with extremely dense yuan qi suddenly trembled. This trembling was not an earthquake, but the continent, the space above it, and everything within it. As it trembled, an illusory feeling spread from the continent. It was as if the entire continent was gradually becoming illusory and becoming invisible. The change was so shocking and unbelievable that even Luo Fan narrowed his eyes slightly. He tried his best to find the source of the change. So it's here. The circulation and changes of the universe are indeed indescribably exquisite. A thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. When the thought disappeared, the boundless continent below him, which even Luo Fan could only vaguely see with his eyesight above 300,000 kilometers, had already disappeared without a trace. It was replaced by a boundless sea, as if the continent had never existed in the first place. The change was unimaginably fast. In the blink of an eye, the world changed and the continent disappeared. In the eyes of others, this kind of change might be incomprehensible, and they might even wonder if they were dreaming. However, before the change was completed, Luo Fan had already seen through the root of this change and knew the reason and specific process of this change. It was naturally impossible for the continent to disappear into thin air. It could even be said that at this moment, the continent still existed. It was still as sturdy as before, and it still had dense vitality. It still vaguely had an extremely mysterious and close connection with the supreme great Tao of the primordial world and the 1,295 continents. In reality, the continent seemed to have disappeared, but in reality, it was only hidden in a deeper space-time. It was a space-time where the flow of time was extremely chaotic compared to the primordial world, but it was extremely compatible with the continent, allowing the continent to exist in a more stable space-time and obtain greater strength. This change was very similar to the special rhythm of the flow of time brought about by the saint's body. However, it was even deeper because even space had its own special rhythm. It was this special, wonderful, and completely different rhythm from the outside world that made it difficult to see the continent, even though it still existed in the primordial world, and its position had not changed at all. It was as if it did not exist at all. Even if there were living beings who could find the original location of the continent, they would only feel that it was a sea, and they would not be able to discover the existence of the continent. The reason for this was very simple. This was because all living beings in the primordial world were in a completely different space-time from this continent. In other words, that continent was in a completely different space-time from the primordial world and all living beings in the primordial world. It was extremely independent and independent. That form of existence was not necessarily stronger than the form of existence of a saint, but it was even more unbelievable. It was also more beneficial to the continent. In this form of existence, the continent could isolate all negative influences from the outside world. It could develop and grow in the best and most comfortable way until it reached the peak. The reason why there was such a mysterious change was because of the uniqueness of the continent. This continent was where Buzhou Mountain had originally stood. It was also where Pangu had stood after creating the world. Since the existence of the primordial world, it had supported Buzhou Mountain and the entire world. It could be said that it was the hub of the entire world. In this great tribulation of the world, this continent had endured the impact of billions of stars falling from the sky, causing billions of stars to collapse and be destroyed. To those stars, this continent was their destroyer. It was the culprit that caused their collapse and destruction. However, to this continent, those stars were the most selfless contributors. They contributed their power and their bodies to continuously refine this continent. They continuously used another method to refine this continent. This kind of refinement constantly tested the sturdiness of this continent. At the same time, it also made this continent more and more mysterious and incredible. In the end, after the great tribulation of the world, this continent finally possessed incredible power and truly became the core hub of the entire primordial world. This kind of change made the essence of this continent different from any matter in the primordial world. It became extraordinary and holy, thus possessing the strange characteristics of a saint. It used the essence of its own existence to change the rhythm of time and space in its position, making the whole world and the supreme great Tao submit to it. The reason why this characteristic erupted at this moment was that the changes in the entire primordial world were still intense. The space-time of the primordial world was still under the absolute rule of that mysterious existence, and it could not submit to this continent. It was only when the mysterious existence relaxed its rule over the space-time of the primordial world during the process of retreating that the space-time of the primordial world submitted to the continent, resulting in this mysterious scene. After understanding these mysteries, Luo Fan suddenly understood something. When the essence of one's existence rises to a certain level, it can affect the space-time of the outside world and make the space-time of the outside world submit to one's own body. So this is not just the privilege of a saint, nor is it the privilege of a cultivator. Instead, it's a power that all artifacts can possess. This thought flashed through his mind. In a flash, he finally understood why he still could not obtain true freedom even though he had completely cut off all connections with the primordial world. He still needed to rely on the primordial world to survive. Perhaps I can't truly obtain freedom because I can't raise the essence of my existence to the level where I can affect the space-time rhythm of the outside world. Thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and he came to a conclusion in the blink of an eye. However, although he had already obtained this conclusion, which he did not know if it was true or false, Luo Fan could not think of anything else. To make the essence of one's existence so strong that it could make one's own space-time rhythm yield to the space-time of the outside world, there was no shortcut other than continuously increasing one's cultivation realm. Even if it was like the Julie child, who could obtain this kind of power with the help of some kind of divine ability, you would need to constantly consume endless power to maintain it. It was only a divine ability. Even the power obtained through this method was extremely weak and could be easily broken. It could not be considered freedom at all. Naturally, it could not be considered freedom. Understanding this, Luo Fan felt that another door had opened in front of him. He suddenly had another goal to work hard for. Hashtag free download of ebooks. Chapter 712. By continuously improving the essence of one's existence, one would be able to strongly influence the rhythm of time and space around them, thereby making the space-time of the outside world bend to one's own rhythm. This would allow one to completely transcend the shackles of the outside world, truly achieve complete self, and truly have the prerequisite of being able to survive freely in the state of chaos. First written, it was not difficult to come to this conclusion. After all, in the state of chaos, time, space, matter, energy, and everything else were in an extremely chaotic state. There was no heaven, earth, and space-time that could support the existence of living beings. Under such circumstances, if living beings wanted to survive, they naturally had to create their own space-time and form their own world. If one's existence could not even affect the space-time of the outside world, and could not make the existence of the outside world bend to one's own form of existence, how could one not be affected in the state of chaos? How could one maintain one's physical existence in it? In the past, Luo Fan only knew that in order to truly survive in the state of chaos, one must obtain the primordial Tao fruit and become a sage. However, he had no idea how to obtain the primordial Tao fruit and why it could exist freely in the state of chaos. In other words, he could not understand the form of existence of the primordial Tao fruit or sage-level existences for 100 years and what kind of incredible magic they had. At this moment, after this enlightenment, another door opened in front of him. The primordial Tao fruit and sage-level existences were still unfathomable to him, and they were still powerful beyond all his imagination. However, he could already vaguely see some traces of them. At the very least, he knew one of the reasons why saint-level existences could exist freely in the state of chaos. Although this reason might be insignificant compared to the true reason why saint-level existences could exist freely in the state of chaos, it was already an unimaginable improvement compared to the time when he couldn't understand or see through it all. This was enough for Luo Fan to be proud for a long time. With a slight thought, the magic power in Luo Fan's body moved slightly. This movement was extremely mysterious and wonderful. It caused his entire body to undergo an incomparably wonderful change. In this change, Luo Fan's form of existence underwent a strange change. Amidst the changes, the time and space around Luo Fan's body underwent a miraculous change. The rhythm of space and time gradually approached the rhythm of his own existence, and gradually separated from the normal rhythm of space and time in the primordial world. As the world changed, Luo Fan's figure gradually disappeared, just like the continent below. It was as if he had never appeared, as if he had never existed in the primordial world. This kind of change was so wonderful, so strange, but it also made people feel that it was so natural, as if Luo Fan had never existed in this world. At this moment, Luo Fan had fallen into an incomparably wonderful state. This kind of wonderful state was not completely perfect. Instead, it was an extremely complicated realm that contained endless freedom, loneliness, darkness, and desolation. This feeling was so complicated that it made Luo Fan's unshakable Tao heart fluctuate. What he had used previously was some of the essence techniques he had extracted from the Jili heavenly scripture. It was a technique that allowed the Jili child to use his three-headed and six-armed body to give his body the characteristics of a sage's body after becoming an itinerant immortal. It allowed him to bend the rhythm of time around him. This essence was hidden very deeply. If it was any other living being, even if they cultivated the nine-ly heaven scripture to its peak, even if they cultivated it to perfection, or even if they cultivated it to the level of a sage, they would definitely not be able to extract this essence. However, Luo Fan was different. It wasn't only because Luo Fan was already at the Zenith Heaven Truth Tao realm, but also because the Nine Dawn Heaven scripture was organized by him according to the profundities contained in the sage's body. It was a mysterious technique that was completely formed from his thoughts. It was precisely because this technique was completely sorted out by him that he was able to have a deeper understanding and a stronger comprehension towards the Jili heavenly scripture than those who had cultivated this technique to perfection. As long as he had some guidance, he would naturally be able to understand the essence of this profound technique and know what sort of profound technique could allow this technique to possess a certain profound power. Therefore, he was able to instantly extract the essence of the technique that allowed him to possess the body of a saint and change the surrounding space-time, making the surrounding time and space submit to him. Thus, with the help of this essence of the technique, he could also possess that kind of mysterious power. Even though this technique was extremely profound, it was only a technique after all. It couldn't truly raise the essence of Luo Fan's existence to the level of a sage. Therefore, if one wanted to use this technique, the amount of spiritual energy needed had reached an unimaginable level. Even with the infinite energy units produced by Luo Fan's sea of consciousness and the huge amount of energy units produced by the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit, they could not keep up with the speed of consumption of energy. In other words, in this state, the energy in Luo Fan's body would only be continuously consumed. It would not be able to achieve a balance between consumption and replenishment. As a result, he was like the Jili child. It was impossible for him to remain in this state forever. Of course, his magic power was hundreds of millions of times deeper than Jili child's. It was naturally extremely difficult for him to completely exhaust his magic power in this situation where he was constantly replenishing his magic power. As a result, the amount of time he could stay in this state was tens of thousands of times longer than the Jili child. The Jili child could only stay in the space-time for less than 15 minutes, but Luo Fan could stay in the primordial world for dozens of yuanhui. However, if he stayed for dozens of yuanhui, the damage to him would be far greater than the damage suffered by the Jili child. After all, his magic power was replenished by the Zenith Heaven Tao fruit and the Dharma power units produced in his sea of consciousness. If such magic power was exhausted as well, it naturally meant that his Tao fruit of the great firmament and his sea of consciousness had suffered irreparable damage, and it had reached a state where he could no longer produce magic power units to replenish his magic power. How could the Jili child, who had only exhausted his magic power, compare to such a consumption? With this premise, no matter how wonderful this state was, Luo Fan would not stay in this state for too long. Moreover, to the Jili child, this state allowed him to transcend all restraints and obtain supreme freedom. However, to him, the situation was countless times more complicated. After all, the Julie child was just a Dharma treasure. Although it was a living Dharma treasure that Luo Fan had refined through various unbelievable methods, its spiritual consciousness was no different from a real living being. However, it was a Dharma treasure after all. It was a Dharma treasure that carried the Julie heavenly scripture and all the power of the saint's body. To him, as long as his body existed, all his cultivation would not be a problem. The wonderful power in the mysterious space-time deep in his body could completely give him everything he needed. Therefore, the various negative emotions brought to him by transcending the shackles of time and space in the outside world and allowing himself to be in his own rhythm of time and space did not affect his spirit at all. All he felt was supreme freedom, the ease and joy of transcending all shackles. However, the situation was completely different for Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan's cultivation realm was billions of times higher than that of the Julie child, there was still a huge gap between him and the saint level. Under such circumstances, his knowledge, eyesight, perception, magic power, and everything else were millions and millions of times worse than that of a sage. Just like that, although he had entered the state that only a saint could have, where he completely transcended all the restraints of the outside space-time and was completely in his own space-time rhythm, he also suffered the various negative effects of this state. It was because of these negative effects that Luo Fan felt so complicated and conflicted. He was in a completely independent space-time rhythm that had transcended the restraints of the outside world. Although it was unprecedented for him to break away from the shackles of the outside world, at the same time, he had completely lost everything. In this state, everything in the outside world had turned into nothingness to him. In the entire world, in the endless space-time, he was the only one who existed. Everything in the world, including the universe, no longer existed to him. His supreme perception that could almost sense the entire primordial world was no longer effective. He was completely cut off from sensing the outside world. He could only sense the space-time he was in, which was his own existence. He could only see his own existence. Everything in the outside world was just darkness and nothingness to him. To him, these were still bearable and could be overcome. What was even more difficult for him to overcome was that his past, present, and future seemed to overlap at this moment, causing him to be in an incomparably marvelous and bizarre state. In this state, he seemed to be his past, his present, and his future. However, at the same time, he seemed to be a strange existence with no past, no present, and no future. It was natural to have such a strange form of existence. Every living being, every substance, and even every energy was a unique existence in the endless world. They all had a space-time rhythm that was completely different from any other living being, substance, and energy. Some of these space-time rhythms were fast and slow, some were twisted and spiraled, some were spinning, and some were even straight and reverse. They were all strange and different. This space-time rhythm was not unchanging. Instead, it would change as living beings, substances, and energy improved and evolved. These changes were not necessarily towards a certain rhythm, but towards the rhythm of perfecting oneself to the greatest extent and allowing oneself to achieve the greatest degree of perfection. To Luo Fan, although the essence of his existence could not be as strong as a saint, who could directly distort the outside world space-time and make it bend to him, he had already reached a certain level of power. Under such circumstances, his space-time rhythm would naturally be closer to the rhythm of perfection than Julie Child. In other words, because Luo Fan's cultivation realm was higher, his space-time rhythm became more intense and profound than Julie Child's space-time rhythm. Luo Fan's goal of cultivation was to eventually form his own great Tao. His space-time rhythm would naturally evolve in this direction. In order to achieve the great Tao, one naturally had to unify one's past, present, and future, reaching a state of perfection in terms of time, space, matter, and energy. As a result, it could be imagined that Luo Fan's space-time rhythm definitely contained all kinds of imaginable changes. It was inevitable for it to be fast and slow, straight and reverse. It was precisely because of this that when Luo Fan used the power of his divine ability to bend the time and space of the outside world to his own rhythm of time and space, allowing himself to gradually approach perfection, approaching the rhythm of time and space of his own Tao, it was equivalent to superimposing the countless selves of the past and future, forming a unified body. To Luo Fan, who would attain primordial chaos Tao fruit in the future, this might be an extremely perfect and perfect form of existence. However, for the current Luo Fan, this strange form of existence had already exceeded the limit of what he could bear. At that moment, he only felt billions of different emotions. Different emotions appeared in his mind at the same time, causing him to be at a loss and unable to face them. If not for the fact that these billions of emotions had the same freedom and the same self, he would have probably been driven crazy by this strange change. After an unknown period of time, it seemed like billions of years had passed, but it also seemed like it was just an instant. Luo Fan finally found his present with his outstanding willpower. He controlled the Dharma power in his body and suddenly calmed down, allowing the surrounding space-time rhythm to recover and return to the space-time rhythm of the primordial world. His figure also appeared in the primordial world. The entire process was extremely natural. It was like a shadow materializing from the void, causing no one to feel any abruptness. After his figure reappeared, Luo Fan was already covered in sweat. His face was slightly pale, and there was regret and joy in his expression. What he regretted was that he had returned to the boundless space-time and could not be at ease. Fortunately, he was able to escape from the state that his body still couldn't bear and was able to recover. These two feelings were extremely strong. They had already surpassed the limits that his mind could suppress. That was why they appeared, causing his body to show such a different change. It also made him sweat cold sweat that he had not shed for countless years. It's a pity that this technique is only used by me in the Daoyuo Truth Dao. The future that I can combine is only the future of the Daoyuo Truth Dao level. Otherwise, I can use the future cultivation realm to increase my current cultivation realm. Luo Fan's mind was extremely tough after all. He recovered in the blink of an eye. Instead, he began to think about how to use the state where the past, present, and future were unified. As the thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan's figure and face returned to normal. At this moment, he understood better than anyone else that with his current cultivation realm, he could not endure that wondrous state at all. Before he obtained a breakthrough in his cultivation realm, he could not use that technique again. Otherwise, the gains would not make up for the losses. He was able to find the present from that strange form of existence this time, but he might not be so lucky next time. If he was not careful and allowed his future to dominate the present, there would be unpredictable consequences. After making up his mind, Luo Fan finally calmed down completely. With a flash of thought, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure directly crossed the distance of 300,000 kilometers and arrived at the original location of the continent. It was where Mount Buzhou used to be, but now it was just above a boundless sea. He floated above the sea, several hundred meters above the ground. His eyes flashed with strange light. It seemed to be the light of wisdom, but also the light of boundless will. After a long while, the time and space around him began to ripple slightly. After that, his figure gradually turned ethereal, and he'd completely vanished after a few breaths of time. It was as if he'd never appeared in the first place. At this moment, Luo Fan had already entered another space-time rhythm. He had directly stepped into the continent that had used his powerful existence essence to affect the space-time rhythm of the outside world, and was thus hidden in the invisible. The place where he was standing was in a valley on this continent, which was also the spot that had endured the impact of the countless falling stars. Clearly, Luo Fan had used his supreme divine ability to change the space-time rhythm around him to the same rhythm as that of the continent. Thus, he crossed the barrier of space-time and stepped into the continent again. During this process, Luo Fan did not use the essence of the technique that allowed him to bend the rhythm of the surrounding space-time to match his own. What he used was only the various powers that changed the space-time of the primordial world after he became a zenith heaven. What he changed was not his own space-time rhythm. Instead, he used a great divine ability to separate the space-time around him from the primordial world. He froze this space-time and changed its rhythm, thus making the space-time and the continent space-time rhythm, thus entering the continent. At this moment, when he looked at the continent, it was still different from before. Instead, it seemed to be separated by a piece of glass. Although it seemed extremely clear, no matter what he looked at, he felt like he could not touch it. The reason for this was that he did not look at the continent with his own eyes. Instead, he looked at it with his will that was frozen on the thin space-time around him. Q. Chapter 713. It was precisely because he could not see it with his own eyes that Luo Fan felt like he was separated from his surroundings by an invisible barrier. Text first. This was also the only way for Luo Fan to see the continent at this moment. After all, the rhythm of time and space he was in was completely different from the rhythm of time and space of this continent. Unless he temporarily gave up on his rhythm of time and space and let his rhythm of time and space completely assimilate with this continent, he would definitely not be able to see or touch any matter in this continent with his own eyes. For Luo Fan, if it was not necessary, would he willingly give up on his rhythm of time and space? Naturally, this was the only way he could use this method to sense the various things in this continent. Observing this continent from this angle, Luo Fan had a different kind of comprehension. After comprehending for a while, he waved his hand, and countless cities flew out of his sleeve. They grew as the wind blew, and in the blink of an eye, they passed through the barriers of time and space and landed in various places on the continent. They occupied most of the hubs of the continent's vitality and received the continent's boundless vitality, causing the cities to constantly undergo all kinds of unbelievable transformations and give birth to all kinds of unbelievable improvements. The rhythm of time and space of this continent was completely different from the outside world, and it was also completely different from the cities and the countless living beings in them. Under such circumstances, when the living beings in the cities entered the continent and were affected by the continent's unique rhythm of time and space, they naturally could not stay awake like Luo Fan. Instead, they were completely lost, as if they had fallen into a long, blurry dream that they could never wake up from. Among these living beings, Buzhou Mountain's god, who was already considered extremely powerful innate gods, was much better than the other living beings. He could barely maintain a bit of consciousness, but he had also lost his own rhythm of time and space. He could only think that he was in some kind of abnormal state, but he could not clearly understand what kind of abnormal state he was in, let alone know how much time had passed or where he was. Although this wonderful state made these living beings unable to control themselves and lost in the rhythm of time and space of this continent, it was also extremely beneficial to these living beings. First of all, in this state, the rhythm of time and space of this continent could unknowingly affect the rhythm of time and space of these living beings, causing them to gradually move closer to this continent. This could allow these living beings to continuously be tempered by the strong essence of existence of this continent, so that their essence of existence could also continuously strengthen. This kind of strengthening might only be slight, but it was extremely rare. However, it was extremely rare. It was almost like helping them cultivate in another way. Moreover, because they were affected by the rhythm of time and space of this continent and were lost, the many living beings would not be affected by the outside world, regardless of their spirit or lifespan. Instead, they could exist forever. They would only return to their original state when this continent spat them out one day and left this continent. This continent was extremely closely related to the entire primordial world. It was extremely mysterious. Under such circumstances, it was naturally impossible for it to maintain this rhythm of time and space independent of the primordial world forever. It would definitely lose this state after a period of time under the circulation of the primordial world. it would merge with the primordial world again and become a space-time again. At that time, it would naturally be the time for these cities to leave this continent. In fact, the process of leaving this continent did not even need Luo Fan's control. As long as the continent's space-time was synchronized with the primordial world again, there would naturally be a repulsive force that would send these cities out of the continent and to a certain place in the primordial world. And those places would definitely correspond to a certain vitality hub on this continent. It was most likely to be in one of the 1,295 continents in the primordial world. How many benefits you can obtain, where you can reach, and when you can leave this state would depend on your luck. It's very literary. Luo Fan sighed. With a thought, the space-time rhythm around him returned to the normal space-time rhythm of the primordial world. As soon as it recovered, the continent gradually became illusory again in his eyes. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. However, his figure reappeared in the sea and floated thousands of feet above the surface of the sea. Before the great tribulation of heaven and earth this time, he put many living beings and the cities of the human and demon clans into his sleeve. It was only because he could protect these cities and living beings. He did not have any intention to control everything about these living beings. Therefore, although he had many ways to arrange the lives of these living beings and even put them into the Void Wuji Palace, which could also bring him more benefits, he did not do so. Instead, he directly placed these living beings in the continent that was the core hub of the primordial world. He let this continent and the natural circulation of the primordial world determine the fate of these living beings and their positions. After doing all this, Luo Fan raised his head and looked up at the starry sky. His eyes pierced through the infinite space-time and directly saw the bright realm behind the sun and moon. At this moment, the bright realm had completed the process of evolving from a minor chiliocosm to a medium-class world. It had become a real, incomparably complete medium-class world. The vastness of this medium-class world was not much different from before, but its depth, stability, and purity of primordial qi were more than 10 times stronger than before. As Luo Fu and the others integrated with the bright realm, they experienced the changes as if they were experiencing it themselves. The benefits they gained were extremely great. At this time, there was an indescribably powerful force brewing in the bright realm. The nature of this force was extremely mysterious. It vaguely contained an existence that the earthly immortal's Tao fruit could not have, primordial unity. Apparently, there were living beings breaking through the earthly immortal's Tao fruit and becoming primordial unity. That's good. Seeing this, Luo Fan was finally completely relieved. A thought flashed through his mind, and he withdrew his gaze. As soon as he felt the aura, he knew that at this moment, Luo Fu had finally broken through to the golden immortal realm and was attaining the primordial unity Tao fruit. Luo Fu had been suppressing this process for a long time. At this time, he had finally completely released it. Naturally, when the conditions were right, success came naturally. There was not the slightest obstruction. There was no need for Luo Fan to worry, so he naturally did not waste time continuing to pay attention to it. If Luo Fu's breakthrough went smoothly, then he would be able to handle the changes of Guangpu, Luo Chunyang, and Luo Guo perfectly, so he did not need to worry. After this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan raised his hand and casually pointed. An invisible and wondrous spiritual light was emitted from his hand, passing through the endless void and sinking into a certain part of the sea that was billions of miles away from where he was. It kept going deeper and deeper until it reached the deepest part of the sea, sinking into a certain black shadow, causing that black shadow to suddenly become illusory and real at the same time, real and fake at the same time. The black shadow was none other than Hong Jun, who had exhausted all his mana and mind when he was mending the sky. At this moment, Hong Jun's expression was serene. The mana in his body slowly flowed and accumulated. His mind seemed to be there and not there, but he was immersed in some extremely mysterious and magical realm. In this realm, the mind and mana in Hongjuan's body could recover at a speed that was tens of thousands of times faster than normal. In the process, his mind could also be refined endlessly, so that its nature and power could be constantly enhanced. This change not only allowed Hongjun to return to his peak state when he woke up, but it could also allow him to constantly stabilize his primordial unity scattered number during this process. Perhaps it could not allow him to directly reach the peak of primordial unity scattered number after he woke up, but at least it could allow him to leave the state of primordial unity scattered number. And this state of primordial unity scattered number, under normal circumstances, would require at least 1,000,000 years to cross. The spiritual light emitted by Luo Fan did not contain any power, but it could affect the space-time around Hongjun, forming some kind of wonderful space-time fault. Outside Hongjuan's body, a thin film with an abnormal rhythm of space-time formed, separating Hongjun from the untainted world, thus isolating all possible effects on Hongjuan's state. This thin film seemed to have almost no thickness, and it was only a thin film that slightly distorted the rhythm of space-time, but in fact it was unimaginably strong. If he could not understand the mystery of space-time rhythm, he could only use the supreme power of breaking space-time to break this thin film, and only then could he affect Hongjun, who was protected by this thin film. And for the untainted world, which had already been unbelievably improved at this time, to affect the void, even the golden immortal realm, was a little difficult. As for breaking space-time to a higher level, perhaps even the cultivators who had achieved Tai Dao fruit might not be able to do it. Therefore, it could be said that with this thin layer of protection, Hongjun was already considered absolutely safe. After doing all this, Luo Fan let out a long breath. With a thought, he took a step forward, and his figure disappeared between the untainted world. This process did not cause any fluctuations of time and space, as if he was just a phantom, and at this moment, he suddenly disappeared. At this time, Luo Fan had directly crossed space-time and appeared on the wonderful platform of the Wuji Palace in the void. As soon as he set foot on this platform, an endless stream of light flowed through his mind, making him feel as if his inspiration was like a landslide or a tsunami. It was as if at every moment, everything he saw, every feeling he felt, and every experience he had in his memories could give him endless strange ideas, allowing him to discover the profound truths hidden behind them. The flow of time in the Wuji Palace was not the same as that of the untainted world. Among them, the flow of time in the boundless world was 365 times faster than that of the untainted world. The flow of time in the medium world was 365 times faster than that of the boundless world, which was 133,325 times faster than that of the untainted world. The flow of time in the small kiliacosm was also 365 times faster than that of the medium world, which was more than 48,627,125 times faster than that of the untainted world. The time in the small kiliacosm was also 365 times faster than that of the medium world, which was more than 48,627,125 times faster. Compared to the small kiliacosm inside the Wuji Palace, trillions of years had passed. Even for the medium world, billions of years had passed. For the great kiliacosm, the time that had passed was the shortest, but it was still tens of millions of years. In this case, it could be imagined how great the changes in the Wuji Palace would be compared to when he left. Trillions of years were just a number. But for a world, for an entire civilization, it was an unimaginably long period of time, enough to produce all kinds of unimaginable changes. During this long period of time, almost all the small kiliacosms in the three-level world system had been destroyed. It was only because of the flow of power in the three-level world system that they were reborn and evolved after being destroyed. This special effect was not controlled by Luo Fan, but formed by the natural flow of the three-level world system. This was also one of the manifestations of the infinite vitality of the world system. In the past, in the Wuji Palace, the time that the small chiliocosm had experienced was definitely not shorter than the time of trillions of years, but there was no situation where the small chiliocosm was destroyed and reborn. At this time, the world system was complete, but this situation occurred. This was not because the structure of the world in the past was more perfect, but on the contrary, it only meant that the structure of the world in the past had no vitality and was not a truly perfect structure. The reason for this was because true perfection had to be active and continuous. It didn't have to be able to continuously improve during this process, but at the very least, it had to maintain its vitality and not let it turn into a pool of stagnant water in the end. The structure of the world in the past was like a lake. How it was when it was first created would be how it would be in the future. Even if there were changes, it was only because of the changes created by the creatures in it. This kind of world was actually extremely fragile. This kind of fragility made it difficult for these worlds to be reborn once they were destroyed. The reason why the situation of destruction did not occur after such a long time was that during such a long time, Luofan's power had been permeated in the Wuji Palace, unknowingly helping the Wuji Palace to suppress these worlds, so that these worlds would not be destroyed because of the passage of time. Nor would it completely lose vitality because of the existence of a pool of stagnant water, causing the creatures in it to become extinct. It could be said that the reason why the previous worlds were not destroyed was not because of the world itself, but because of Luofan's remarkable ability and infinite power. But at this time, the structure of this three-layered world system was completely different. There were more than 9 million worlds in this three-layered world system, and each of them had some kind of mysterious connection with any other world. All the worlds combined together to form an incomparably perfect and incomparably mysterious formation, so that the power of each world was mobilized, constantly moving and operating between the three-layered world system, thus becoming incomparably active and incomparably flexible. Because of this, these worlds no longer needed to reject the suppression of Luofan's power, nor did they need to reject the suppression of the Du Tian chaotic divine thunder. They only needed the interaction between the worlds to achieve complete stability. Without the suppression of Luofan's power and the suppression of the Du Tian chaotic divine thunder, once those worlds lost vitality, or when the power they endured exceeded their own endurance, they would naturally collapse and be transformed into the world's origin. With the help of the power of other worlds, they would evolve and be reborn, forming a new world, forming a cycle of birth and death. This cycle could not only reshuffle the world, but also allow the world itself to undergo some kind of evolution, allowing its endurance to obtain some subtle improvement. This could also be said to be a kind of world evolution. In the trillions of years since Luofan left the Wuji Palace, almost every minor chiliocosm had been destroyed and reborn more than once. Among them, the 3,000 minor chiliocosms that Luofan had first created had the most number of times of being destroyed and reborn. Even the medium-class world that he had first created was on the verge of being destroyed. Among the 3,000 minor chiliocosms, the one that Luofan had first created had the most number of times of being destroyed and reborn. It was the first minor chiliocosm of the Wuji Palace, a minor chiliocosm that had existed for trillions of years before its reincarnation was perfected. The reason for such changes was that these worlds had existed for too long. In the past, because of the existence of Luofan's power and the existence of the Thunder Sea, there had been too many factors that could lead to the destruction of these worlds. As long as the triggering force was tens of thousands of times greater than that of other newborn worlds, these worlds could be destroyed. Of course, for these worlds, there was no difference between the destruction of other worlds and the destruction of other worlds. These worlds could be improved and evolved after being reborn. To some extent, this was also a process of venting the various negative factors that had been suppressed in the past. However, after all, there were too many negative factors that had been suppressed. In the trillions of years, the oldest minor chiliocosm had been destroyed and reborn nearly 10,000 times. It was almost every 5 or 6 billion years it would be destroyed and reborn once. The density of this kind of destruction and rebirth was hundreds of times greater than that of other newborn worlds. But at the same time, this high density of destruction and rebirth had also allowed this minor kiliocosm to obtain benefits that were far greater than that of other worlds. Not only had it gradually vented all kinds of negative factors that had been accumulated in the past, but it had also condensed the richest spiritual vigor in the entire world system during this process. This made the environment after each rebirth of the minor kiliocosm to be the best among the other millions of minor kiliocosms. The living creatures born here were much better than those in other worlds. The probability of the birth of experts was also the highest among the entire world system. Chapter 714. Although every 5 or 6 billion years, each minor kiliocosm would experience a world-ending calamity, each calamity would cause the cultivators in the minor kiliocosm to experience a qualitative breakthrough. As a result, the number of cultivators that ascended from the minor kiliocosm to the next level would skyrocket. Ikarit look after almost 10,000 cycles of life and death. A third of the hundreds of millions of earthly immortal realm cultivators in the dimensional realm had come from this minor thousand world, whereas another half of the remaining two-thirds had ascended from the other 2,999 minor thousand worlds, and the remaining third had grown up in this dimensional realm. Amongst these hundreds of millions of earthly immortal realm cultivators, most of them were naturally at the independent immortal realm. There were only a few hundred true immortal realm cultivators above them, and there were no golden immortal realm cultivators above them at all. At most, there were only a few cultivators who were faintly on the verge of the golden immortal realm, and they could be considered to have barely stepped into the half-step golden immortal realm. Of course, the dimensional world was so vast, while the vitality within it was so dense, so it was naturally impossible for it to merely accommodate a few 100 million earthly immortal realm cultivators. In fact, at this moment, there were tens of thousands of times more intelligent beings than the earthly immortal realm cultivators in this dimensional world. In fact, besides these intelligent beings, there were even more beasts, birds, and insects living in this dimensional world. The existence of these beings was obviously not something that had ascended from a minor dimension. Rather, they were created by the natural evolution of this dimensional realm. Every life form had its own unique characteristics of this dimensional realm. Every life form contained the power of good fortune of this dimensional realm. It was because there were so many lives in this dimensional realm that even though only billions of years had passed, this dimensional realm had already reached a point where it could no longer bear the burden. At any time, the smallest fuse could cause a world-destroying calamity to erupt, causing the entire dimensional realm to experience the cycle of life and death. At this moment, Luo Fan was standing on the platform. The boundless inspiration that had been condensed from the various minor kiliocosms over the past trillions of years, and the number of living beings that couldn't even be described by numbers, was surging in his mind. While he felt that his mind had obtained an indescribable cleansing, he also understood the various changes that had occurred in the limitless Void Palace over the past trillions of years. All sorts of inspiration settled in the depths of his mind, and a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. With a light step, Lin Ming arrived at the collapsing dimensional realm and arrived above the Tao Palace of this dimensional realm. This Tao Palace was formed by the combination of the Xuanji Boy and the Zhifeng Boy's magic treasures and the laws of this dimensional realm. It was the manifestation of all the principles of this dimensional realm, and it was also the most noble and mysterious place in the entire dimensional realm. At this moment, in this Tao Palace, the Xuanji Boy and the Zhifeng Boy, who were revered as supreme beings by the entire realm, solemnly came before Luo Fan and bowed. "Greetings, Master," they said in unison. Luo Fan faintly smiled. He lifted his hand and lifted them up, saying, "You've done well. This dimensional realm is far more prosperous than I expected. Thank you for your praise, Master, but still not fast enough. None of these beings could ascend before the cycle of reincarnation. We failed Master's orders. Please punish us, Master," the Zhifeng Boy said with incomparable shame. Why should I be ashamed? How can it be so easy to become a primordial immortal? The untainted land is blessed by nature. In so many years, apart from our own people, who else has become a primordial immortal? I'd be surprised if a being in this dimensional realm could become a primordial immortal in just a few billion years. Luo Fan shook his head and smiled. As he spoke, he came to the Tao Palace and sat down. This Tao Palace was connected to the laws of the entire dimensional realm, and it also occupied the source of the entire realm's vitality. Sitting in it, one could naturally feel the pulse of the entire realm and the flow of the aura of the entire realm. It was quite a wonderful feeling. Sure enough, I've reached the limit. Fortunately, under the effect of the power of the world's flow, most of the beings' life imprints will be reincarnated in other worlds, so they won't really die. I won't waste these trillions of years of good fortune. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly as he thought so. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the entire dimensional realm suddenly began to shake. An aura of annihilation suddenly emerged from nothingness and instantly filled the entire dimensional realm, causing the yuan qi of the entire realm to become violent. At the same time, the beings in this dimensional realm were stung by this aura of annihilation. The contradictions that had accumulated in the past for countless years broke out in an instant. Almost all the beings became desperate. Even if it would lead to the destruction of the world and the death of all living beings, they wanted to end the accumulated hatred in the past. As a result, countless more and more intense battles broke out, and the scope of the battles became wider and wider, causing more and more damage to the dimensional realm. In this dimensional realm, there were hundreds of millions of beings in the third realm of earthly immortals, and the beings in the third realm of earthly immortals, even those in the individual immortal realm, already possessed incredible magical powers. Even for the untainted land, they had considerable destructive power, let alone this dimensional realm, which was 2 realms lower than the untainted land. In a dimensional realm like this, even a cultivator at the bodiless immortal realm was equivalent to a fiend god. The aftershock of every single battle was probably capable of obliterating the heavens and the earth in an area of 5,000 kilometers and transforming it into chaos. In this sort of situation, all living beings would lose all scruples and display their full strength to fight. The destruction that would occur in this dimensional realm could be imagined. Only a short while after the battle began, the aura of annihilation in the entire dimensional realm was already thousands of times thicker than it was at the beginning. And this increasingly thick aura of annihilation caused the beings in the entire dimensional realm to become more and more fearless. The battles also became more and more terrifying, and the destruction caused became more and more severe. Thus, the piercing aura of annihilation became more and more intense. In this way, it formed an incomparably tragic, vicious cycle. I didn't expect that it would actually be my thought that would cause this apocalyptic calamity. In the Tao Palace, Luo Fan didn't need to rely on his own senses to see all the changes in the entire dimensional realm, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Compared to tens of thousands of years ago, Luo Fan's knowledge had already increased by countless times. With just a slight perception, he understood why there would be such a coincidence. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the great calamity of this dimensional realm would be triggered. It was obvious that the apocalyptic calamity of this dimensional realm was triggered by this thought of Luo Fan. In other words, it was precisely because of this thought that appeared in Luo Fan's mind that the apocalyptic calamity that needed some time to brew was directly triggered in advance. The principle behind this seemed to be very profound, but it was actually extremely simple. It was because this dimensional realm was created by Luo Fan with the help of the primal chaos divine lightning. It could be said that Luo Fan was the creator of this dimensional realm. On the other hand, he himself possessed the cultivation of the all-heaven true Tao, and his divine ability had already attained an unbelievable realm. His every action and thought would naturally form various unbelievable laws and laws. These laws and laws might not be stable, and their influence wasn't great. In the Great Desolate World, they couldn't really cause great changes to the Great Desolate World. But in this dimensional realm, these laws and laws could almost directly suppress the countless laws and laws that existed in the dimensional realm itself. They could directly replace the great Tao that had controlled this dimensional realm for hundreds of millions of years. As a result, his thought was about to trigger the apocalyptic calamity that had been brewing to its limit. How could it be an incredible thing? However, the destruction of a world was an extremely tragic scene. Even if Luo Fan's Tao heart was perfect, even if his mind was flawless, even if he had seen the apocalyptic calamity of the Great Desolate World, even if he knew that this was the inevitable evolution of the world, he still couldn't help but feel pity. He couldn't face it indifferently. Therefore, he couldn't help but let out such a sigh. While Luo Fan was sighing, the apocalyptic calamity had developed to a point where it couldn't be stopped. It formed a domino effect. Like a landslide or tsunami, the entire dimensional realm was stirred up. The entire dimensional realm began to crack and collapse. More and more space cracks appeared in the void. At first it was only a faint shimmer, but eventually it spread out like a spider web, covering the entire dimensional realm. The entire dimensional realm was wrapped up in these spiderweb-like space cracks, causing the entire dimensional realm to look like a broken piece of porcelain that was on the verge of collapsing. With the entire dimensional realm undergoing such a drastic change, the Tao Palace that was the hub of the entire dimensional realm, the center of all rules, laws, and even the source of all life, was now covered with countless cracks. It was clear that as the dimensional realm collapsed and was destroyed, the Tao Palace would also collapse and be destroyed. Luo Fan sighed. He lifted a finger, and the Tao Palace was instantly stripped away from the dimensional realm, turning into a pure building. It completely lost all of its previous uses and no longer had any connection with the dimensional realm. Although it had lost its uses, because it was cut off from the outside world, the Tao Palace no longer needed to share the same fate as the dimensional realm. It wouldn't collapse along with the dimensional realm. Thank you, Master, for saving us. The avatars of Zhifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy bowed to Luo Fan. The destruction of the dimensional realm naturally didn't affect Zhifeng Boy and Xuanji Boy's main bodies at all. They wouldn't be damaged by the destruction of the dimensional realm. But for these two avatars, the destruction of the dimensional realm was a calamity. It would completely destroy the will that they had developed over billions of years and cause them to perish. Although they would be reborn in the dimensional realm, because of the existence of their main bodies, they would no longer be themselves. Rather, they would be a completely new avatar, a completely new incarnation. Even though they still had the memories of all these years and the perception of all these years, their emotions were no longer the same as they were now. They were avatars of magic treasures and didn't have a mind of their own, but they still had everything that normal life forms had. They naturally didn't lack the desire to live. If they couldn't change their fate of death, then they might be able to calmly accept it. But if they could survive, how could they possibly choose death? And Luo Fan's method of separating the Tao Palace from the dimensional realm had clearly changed their fate of death. That was why there was such a bow of thanks. Luo Fan shook his head and didn't say anything. At this time, the Tao Palace had already lost all of its uses. If he wanted to observe the dimensional realm, he could only rely on his own perception and his own eyes. For him, this naturally wasn't difficult at all. But this change in perspective allowed him to see the process of the dimensional realm's destruction even more clearly. It allowed him to feel the scene of the world's destruction more directly. In this sort of situation, he naturally didn't care about the feelings of Xuanji Boy and Zhifeng Boy. Although the Tao Palace was still in the dimensional realm, everything that happened in the dimensional realm was like it was happening in another time and space. It didn't affect the Tao Palace at all. Even if the void where the Tao Palace was completely shattered, it didn't have the slightest effect on the Tao Palace. The changes in the dimensional realm were extremely intense. Soon, the entire void of the dimensional realm had collapsed into countless tiny spatial fragments. These fragments turned into wind dragons that circled the void of the dimensional realm, wiping out all matter and all life that dared to enter their range of influence. The earth had already cracked into countless parts. Magma and evil energy surged out, violently reacting with the surrounding seawater. It produced countless poisonous smoke that gradually spread throughout the entire dimensional realm. Under such a drastic change, even if the many life forms in the dimensional realm were stronger than ordinary life forms and their vitality was more tenacious, they still couldn't withstand such a drastic change. Large numbers of life forms continued to die. In just a quarter of an hour, the number of living beings in this dimensional realm had been reduced by more than 90%. Only those cultivators with some cultivation base, loose immortals, and true immortals were still fighting each other to the death. At this moment, their minds were already filled with hatred, and everything that happened in the outside world had become extremely secondary to them. They had become extremely illusory, and they couldn't pay any attention to anything at all. In this case, how could they restrain their actions for the sake of the death of so many life forms? The process continued to develop. Those cultivators with some cultivation base were also dying in this process. They were constantly dying. After every life died, there would be some sort of marvelous rule that would act upon their life mark. Most of these life marks would disappear from this dimensional realm through these rules and reincarnate into another dimension or dimensional realm. Only a small portion of life marks couldn't withstand this law. The moment the law acted on them, they collapsed and died. After several hours, the entire dimensional realm was finally unable to maintain its basic structure. A loud sound that shook the souls of all the surviving life forms resounded in the air. The entire dimensional realm finally collapsed. All of space, all of time, all of matter, all of energy, all of it disintegrated after this loud sound. It was as if everything had been stirred by a blender, forming a chaotic state. This state was neither big nor small, neither inside nor outside. It felt as if there was no end to it, and one would never be able to find the edge of it. However, from the outside, it was extremely small, almost like a tiny singularity. At this time, Luo Fan was in the Tao Palace, and the Tao Palace was in this incomparably chaotic state. Naturally, it felt as if there was no end to it, The destruction of a world is always a tragedy. Luo Fan sighed. He stood up, lifted his foot, and stepped out of the Tao Palace. He stepped out of the ruins of the dimensional realm and arrived on the platform above. With a thought, he saw the 3 levels of the world system, as well as the dimensional realm in the second level. He could see that it was a tiny dot. Around that dot, the 3,000 minor dimensions were still the same as before the dimensional realm was intact. They didn't seem to have changed because of the collapse of the dimensional realm. After all, to the outside world, the dimensional realm still existed. The essence of the world, its power, its time, and its space were still there. There wasn't any overall change. In such a situation, there naturally wasn't any change to the outside world. Naturally, it wouldn't destroy the integrity of the world system. Luo Fan personally entered the dimensional realm to observe the destruction of the dimensional realm. This was because he wanted to feel how the world within the system completed the cycle of life and death of a world. Although the previous developments had caught him off guard, he had still completed half of his goal. Now that the other half of his goal was about to be completed, he naturally wouldn't let it go. His attention was focused on the dimensional realm, waiting for the next changes to occur. At this time, in the other 9 million dimensional realms, there were traces of indescribably wonderful existences that flowed through the tiny dot through mysterious channels. During this process, these wonderful existences didn't decrease in the slightest, but because they flowed through, the tiny dot began to undergo all sorts of mysterious changes. It was as if these existences that flowed through the tiny dot were some sort of inconceivable catalyst that was causing the tiny dot to undergo mysterious changes. Hashtag